What's up, Earth Rockers? It's your boy Shovatar here with a video that is, in many ways, the culmination of everything I've done on this channel for the past year. You see all these games down here? I'm going to rank them all, but before I get started ranking them all, there's a few things that I want to explain, mostly like what these tiers generally mean to me. I'll start off with the easiest one, Won't Play. Is pretty self-explanatory. These are games that I either have no interest in or have no ready access to, basically both. The one exception is Castlevania The Adventure. It's down here and Won't Play, but the thing is I actually have played Castlevania The Adventure. The thing is that Castlevania The Adventure is so awful that, like, I didn't really even want to put it on the list with anything else, so it's kind of down here. And I never finished it, so I might as well not have played it. I also want to explain, like, the lower tiers here. Bad is, like, exactly what it sounds like. It's like a game. If I can't think of anything, like, nice to say about a game, then it's gonna go in here. And, not many games are gonna be down here. I won't spoil how many are gonna be down here, but it's not gonna be many. Unfortunate are games that, like, had ideas that I thought, like, had potential, but just kind of, like, didn't work in the execution. And it was important for me to phrase it like this because I think very few games in the Castlevania series are kind of, like, beyond anything, like very few games in the series are just, like, unsalvageable or without any redeeming characteristics. Problem are games that are, like, generally solid or like have the potential to be solid, but they just have, like, one or two really big glaring flaws that prevent them from getting into, like, this upper echelon, these next four tiers, which are self-explanatory, just kind of different levels of good. Basically, like, if I can't think of anything bad about a game, anything like a game does wrong, or if a game does some things wrong but does other things so right that it, like, makes up for it in a big way, then it's going to go up here in Legendary. And then these top two are for the number 1 and the number 2 spot. And another thing that I should mention is that I'm going to be ranking them between tiers, but I'm also going to be ranking them within tiers, where, like, if there's multiple games in the same tier, then whichever game is all the way to the left will be, like, the highest ranked in that particular tier. So I think I've pretty much covered everything, and I think I might as well get started with the very first game of the series, Castlevania 1986. Where is it? There it is. This game is excellent. Castlevania 1 is an excellent game. The thing about Castlevania 1 that makes it stand out the most to me is the pacing compared to the rest of the series, where the game is very short if you know what you're doing. It's like you can clear it in 20 minutes, roughly. That's what I've done. And so it just makes for, like, a sort of very streamlined, very tight experience compared to the rest of the games that came after it and that were inspired by it. But on a more fundamental level, the thing about Castlevania that makes it work are two things. It's the whip, and then it's the sub-weapons. And the whip, like, the Belmont whip is so important, and there's a reason why it spawned all these other games underneath it at the bottom there. So I don't know very much about retro gaming generally, but I have seen more than a couple of, like, shovelware side-scrollers on, like, the Angry Video Game Nerd or just, like, randomly in message board conversations. And the thing about, like, retro games where you have contact damage with enemies, which is basically every retro game, is that contact damage means that closing distance, period, is inherently risky. And a problem that I've seen in a lot of, like, shovelware side-scroller games is, like, your weapon is too short. So trying to close distance to deal damage to enemies without taking damage yourself is very, like, imprecise and frustrating. And what the whip does is the whip solves that problem perfectly by giving you this very long-range attack, which means you're not going to have to worry about, like, oh, is it a risk to close distance with this enemy to try to, like, hit it without taking damage myself? But the trade-off is that it has this wind-up time, which means you have to think more about what you're doing. And this ties into the what makes the sub-weapon so good, which is that Castlevania 1 has this wonderful blend of, like, strategic elements and also action elements, where it is about correctly timing your jumps and timing your swings, but it's also about planning your swings and, like, planning your sub-weapon usages. Because of the fact that like all of your movements are so like modular, where like if you jump, you're committed to that jump for a pretty good like period of time, and you can, and since there's no air control, you're gonna land at like a particular spot. So like you have to. It's a game that really rewards like prior knowledge. It rewards learning it, and it rewards strategizing. As far as the sub-weapons go, the sub-weapons are kind of like the are another element of that strategic gameplay, where deciding when to pick up which sub-weapons and how to incorporate that into your run is really important. Of course, you know, that being said, there is a bit of a balance problem in Castlevania 1. You know, the Holy Water is incredibly overpowered. It unlocks and kills the Grim Reaper and Frankenstein and the second phase of Dracula, which are like the 3 hardest bosses in the whole game. So that is kind of a problem. But I just wanted to mention and introduce kind of the dichotomy between strategy, as in like succeeding because you made the right decision, and execution, as in succeeding because you made the right input. Execution, like carrying out strategy requires a certain degree of execution, but in my mind, Castlevania 1 is much more of like a strategy game, where like your success is going to depend ultimately on planning out your movements and like planning out your sub-weapon usages, which is very easy to do since it's pretty much like holy water most of the time. So if I love this game so much, why isn't it in Legendary? Well, the sub-weapon balance is one reason. But the bigger reason, honestly, is stage 16 of Castlevania 1, which, if you've never played it, you have to jump across this like these like bridge segments while fighting off these very large bat enemies, and the large bat enemies, like their AI is very unintuitive in my opinion. Like I never in all the time that I spent playing the game like really figured out how they work or like what makes them do what they do. And it's very frustrating, because when you can't understand why an enemy is doing what it's doing, then like you can't influence it. And if you can't influence it, then it's basically RNG. The solution that I stumbled upon for clearing stage 16 consistently is just doing what I've seen like speedrunners do. But it is basically just a series of arbitrary actions for me to get through it consistently, because I don't understand why what I'm doing is influencing them to respond in the way that they do. I just know that it works. So because stage 16 is somewhat frustrating, and because the sub-weapons are not like really well balanced, and because it's a little bit, I mean, it's maybe not be fair to put as a mark against it, but it's a little bit simplistic. I mean, it's the first game of the series, so it has every right to be simplistic, but, you know, I'm comparing it to everything else, unfortunately, so that's where it's going to be. Excellent tier. Next up, we have Simon's Quest. Simon's Quest, I gotta say, is going in unfortunate. It's not going to be, it doesn't go into bad, because Simon's Quest is kind of like the quintessential, like, there was potential for the game to be good territory. It was the first non-linear. It was the first, like, non-linear Castlevania game, the first one that introduced, like, world exploration and currency and merchants and RPG elements, which didn't come back until much, much later with Symphony of the Night. But what I really like about Simon's Quest, the thing that kind of saves it from bad tier, is I love the atmosphere of Simon's Quest. I kind of like the idea of going on this big exploratory quest to all these different spooky mansions to collect the pieces of Dracula's body and get it together. I like kind of the idea of it. The problem is that in execution, it's just really, really boring. that's kind of the Achilles heel of Simon's Quest, because there's like some cool stuff in it. Like I like the fire whip that you get at the end. I like the shield that you get. That's like a new thing that really doesn't ever appear again in Castlevania until Order of Ecclesia, which is very much influenced by Simon's Quest, but I'm gonna have to wait to talk about that. But the really big issue is just that it's boring. Like, there's no bosses, or there's like one boss, pretty much, Camilla, and then like you can just run past death. The combat's not interesting. The environments are very samey. You walk through pretty much the same stretch of forest over and over and over again. And you have to farm, and if you want to get like the whip upgrade, the new whip upgrades as soon as they're available, then you have to like farm hearts during like the nighttime, which is not fun to do at all. There's absolutely nothing fun about farming ever, under any circumstances. So for all those reasons and more, it's going to be very, very low down here. But but I give it credit for like the ideas that it had and the atmosphere that it cultivated. Next up, back into... Sorry, I was looking at something. Back into classic linear Castlevania. We have Castlevania III, Dracula's Curse, which is, in my personal opinion, the second best Castlevania game in the entire series. And for a little bit of explanation before I say anything else, so this tier list, what this is here, is the Japanese version of Dracula's Curse. This tier list has them listed as separate games, which I don't know. I've played both versions, and I honestly don't think they're that different. Like, people make a big deal out of the fact that basically the US version is harder. The bosses have more health. The sub-weapon placements are slightly different. Grant, one of the 3 companion characters, which I'll talk about, is nerfed in the US version. And then the US version hard mode is, I would say, substantially different from the JP hard mode, but to be honest, like, ultimately, they don't really matter. Like, they're basically the same game. I really don't think that the regional differences are that impactful. The JP version is definitely easier, but if you learn the game, if you figure out how the game works and what's good and like where the sub-weapons are and when to get them and how to like solve the rooms, like it's not really different. And the reason it's not that different, and the reason it doesn't make that much of a difference, is because Dracula's Curse is a game that is all about strategy. When I was talking about Castlevania 1 about strategy and execution, this is just like so much of your success or failure in this game goes into planning out which sub-weapons am I going to have when, and the element of it that gives that decision such incredible depth in Dracula's Curse are the 3 companions. There's Sypha, there's Alucard, and there's Grant. And Sypha and Alucard each have their own routes. Grant can go into either route, but I really don't think that the Alucard route is made to be completed with anybody besides Alucard. So I don't really think of Grant as like an Alucard route character. I kind of think of like you can take the Sypha route with either Sypha or Grant, or you can go do the Alucard route. That's how I think of it personally. But what that means is that you now have these extra tools that you can take advantage of. And in my opinion, Grant, and they all do different things, like Sypha, Sorceress, good in combat, gives you like extra combat options. Grant is, he can use some of the same sub-weapons that Trevor can. He can throw an axe, he can throw a knife, he can pick up a stopwatch. But the thing about Grant that makes him really cool is that he can climb around on level geometry. And that fact alone adds so much... It just opens up so many more options about what you can do and different solutions you can come up with for the different... for the levels. Because the thing about Dracula's Curse, and I glossed over this earlier, is that Dracula's Curse is like really fucking hard. I actually don't think it's the hardest Castlevania game, but I would say it's like the second hardest US Dracula's Curse. So because the game is so difficult, and because the levels are designed to be so frustrating and so challenging, you're forced to take advantage of the companions. You are incentivized to make full use of their abilities by the high difficulty of the game. So like the game's not just hard for no reason. It's hard to make you think, and it's hard to make you take advantage of the tools that the game is giving you. So that's why I love this game so much, because it's so rewarding to make the correct decisions, and you just feel like you have so many options. It feels like there's so many different ways you could tackle the various challenges, but it also feels like if you make the right choice, if you make an optimal choice, then you are rewarded for that decision. So basically, whether you succeed or fail is entirely up to your own intellect and your own creativity, where as far as Grant is concerned, and your own routing, basically. That being said, I do think that of the two routes, the Cypher route is definitely the stronger one. The Alucard route can be very frustrating. There's some levels in the Alucard route that are pretty bad. Mostly thinking of Alucard 5 and Alucard 7, just kind of boring cave levels with a lot of like time-wasting rooms. But other than that, like this game is so special to me. I neglected to mention that when I first played Castlevania 1, like the feeling I got when I first got to Dracula in Castlevania 1 was extremely special, and was kind of like the moment when I knew that this series is going to be something that I put a lot of time and a lot of thought and a lot of effort into. But like Dracula's Curse was when it like elevated my appreciation of the franchise, and when I became absolutely sure that I was going to go through as much of the whole thing as I could. Because this game was just so engaging and so like thought-provoking in terms of the impactful decisions that you could make. So this game is like excellent. It is in terms of like the strategic elements of Castlevania, it is unmatched. So that's why it's so high. I'm just going to say they're equivalent. I'm not going to say one version is better than the other, because I think they both have pros and cons, which would take too long to get into. Okay, what's next? Okay, Kid Dracula. This is like a spin-off game that I only played because it was in this tier list and I wanted to rank it. I'm going to put this game in great tier, mostly just because I think it's really funny. Like, so this game was released only in Japan for the Famicom, and it's not like other Castlevania games. You're not a guy with a whip. It's not like Castlevania games because it's not a Castlevania game. You're not a guy with a whip running around fighting monsters. You're a goofy little kid shooting fireballs, getting different abilities. It's much more of a platformer, runny, jumpy, shooty game. But again, like the reason why it's as high as it is because it's funny. There's just lots of like goofy like mini games between the levels, and then like there's this boss fight at the end of level 5 where instead of a boss fight you have to do a trivia quiz against the Statue of Liberty, because Kid Dracula goes to New York, which I just had to look up the answers to because I don't speak Japanese, and the whole thing is in Japanese. So however, the game is actually really fun. It's not just funny, it's also like pretty fun to play. There's a level of creativity to like how you utilize Kid Dracula's different abilities in the game, and then level 9 of Famicom Kid Dracula is like really, really cool. The music is great. The gameplay suddenly becomes very, very demanding, kind of like at the very end. Well, earlier stages are pretty hard, but like level 9 is really where it tests you on like everything, and it's one of the best last levels in any game on this chart, frankly. I think about 4 years later, there was a version released in America on the Game Boy, which is Kid Dracula, for the Game Boy, which I'm going to put in good tier because a big part of what made the Famicom Kid Dracula game so engaging and so appealing was its presentation, and unfortunately on the Game Boy you're stuck in black and white, and you don't have like all the colorful characters and environments that you see in the Famicom version, and also it doesn't have the same like excellent level 9 that the Famicom version had, although it does have a better level 8. Because there's like they both have stages where you have to jump on a bunch of platforms, like in this like vertical, very fast vertical auto-scroller, and in the Famicom version there's some randomness in that stage that can just like kill you, and then in this version there isn't, so technically that's better, but generally because the game is selling itself so much on being fun and being silly, the fact that the Famicom version is more colorful gives it the edge, in my opinion. Even though Kid Dracula is perfectly fine, like it's you know. I think that the power-ups are actually doled out in a way that's more balanced in Kid Dracula, and there's dialogue in Kid Dracula, actually, that there isn't in the Famicom version, but... Oh well, whatever. Okay, what's next? Belmont's Revenge. We're still on the Game Boy. So Belmont's Revenge is a great game, and it is better than Kid Dracula. This might be like a controversial ranking, because I've heard a lot of people complain about Belmont's Revenge, and the number one complaint that they all have about Belmont's Revenge is the walk speed, and it's such a big complaint that I want to talk about it right at the beginning before I talk about anything else, because something that's going to come up again, especially when I get to the later games in the franchise, is like the importance of movement. Movement is like arguably the most important thing in any video game, because it's what you're going to be doing all the time. And if moving feels bad or moving feels too slow, then you're going to be experiencing that every single second that you play the game, because you're always going to be moving. So yes, the Belmont's Revenge slow walk speed is an issue, and it's unfortunate, but at the same time, the game is very clearly designed around the slow walk speed. I played a ROM hack of Belmont's Revenge that increased the run speed, and like, I'm gonna be honest, yes, it was more fun, but it also like didn't feel like the same. It didn't feel like some of the jumps were like more awkward, and some of like traversing some of the level geometry felt a little bit unnatural. That could just be because I was used to the slower run speed, but I think that they kind of designed it from the ground up like that. And you could say, well, they could have just not designed it like that, and that's fair enough. And the low movement speed is the reason why Belmont's Revenge is one reason why Belmont's Revenge isn't going up into excellent or legendary tier or anything like that. So why do I like it so much? Why is it so high, relatively speaking? Why is it not in good or like problem or anything like that? It's because there's a couple of reasons. Number one, I love the soundtrack of Belmont's Revenge. Belmont's Revenge has an amazing soundtrack. It's the best soundtrack for any Game Boy game that I've ever heard. I haven't heard that many, full disclosure, but it's really, really incredible. The other thing is that the first 4 levels of Belmont's Revenge are really distinctive, not just from each other, but also from other environments in the Castlevania franchise. Like, the only boss that you fight in Belmont's Revenge that you've fought in other Castlevania games is Dracula himself at the end. And those first 4 levels, like, the soundtrack is great for all of them. They're very, like the challenges all feel different, and the bosses are all very distinct to that game. Like a big chicken man in armor, or like the 2 statues shooting fireballs at you. And I just love how powerfully it has its own identity in that sense. And speaking of presentation and color, I do want to emphasize that I'm basing this ranking off of the Game Boy Color European version of Belmont's Revenge. Because it does make a difference. Like, the game is way better when it's in color, which is why I wish I could have done my no damage on the Game Boy Color version. I didn't, because this is another game that has regional differences, where the different regions have different sub-weapons. The JP version has... The JP version, and then the European Color version has the Holy Water and the Cross. The US version has the Holy Water and the Axe. And the Axe is honestly, like, better than the Cross, in my opinion. Just because it can deal with things that you otherwise would have no way of handling. But that's just an aside. As much as I like this game, so there are 2 things that are keeping it out of the higher tiers. There is the slow movement speed, which I already talked about, and then the other thing is that as much as I love the first 5 levels of Belmont's Revenge, I think the 6th level is a real shit show. It totally drops the ball, because the last 2 levels are both take place within Dracula's castle. It's these 2 Dracula's castle levels, and the second Dracula's castle level, level 6, the music is boring as fuck. It goes on for way too long. You're just in, like, this series of annoying, like, waiting for spikes to go up and down, waiting for platforms to move back and forth, waiting, and then you have 2 boss fights in a row, which are basically down to like pure memorization. You fight your evil son, Soliu or Solel, I don't know what the fuck, I don't know how the hell you pronounce his name. And then you fight Dracula, and both of those fights basically just come down to like memorizing what they do, because they don't like, there's no like, they don't telegraph their attacks. They just do a certain thing in a certain pattern, and you just have to know what they're gonna do before they do it. So it really, really fumbles right before the end zone, in my opinion. But everything before that is really, really good. I love Belmont's Revenge. I think it's a great game, which is why it's in great tier. And now we get to Super Castlevania IV, and this game is going in problem tier. I said that the Belmont's Revenge ranking might be a controversial ranking. I know for a fact this is going to be a controversial ranking, and I want to talk a little bit, I want to like explain myself. So Super Castlevania IV, the first thing you have to know about Super Castlevania IV is that Super Castlevania IV, in the context of the series up to this point, is a big departure. The sort of basic controls of the game completely change. Where Castlevania prior to this point is sort of like marked by these fixed jumping arcs, and the whip, the Belmont whip swing, wind up straight in front of you. You have a large coverage like in front of you, and then at the cost of like a slow wind up that you have to play around. Super Castlevania IV changed both of those things, where now you have full air control, you have 8-directional whipping, you can whip in all 8 directions, and you can also flail your whip. If you hold down the B button and then like wiggle the D-pad around, Simon will flail his whip around to like block projectiles. That's pretty much all it's good for. Actually, it does have a few niche uses in like a few spots in the game, so I don't actually have a problem with either of those things. I don't have a problem with full air control, and I don't really have a problem with 8-directional whipping. I think that 8-directional whipping renders some sub-weapons obsolete, mainly the axe, and also one could argue the holy water. But I think that the game is not really like designed around like making you think super hard about your sub-weapons. So that's not necessarily a deal breaker. I think that whip flailing is annoying, to be honest with you. I think that and it's like a very specific, it has to do with like specific inputs and kind of like how I play Castlevania games, where the way you trigger whip flailing is by holding down the attack button and then moving the D-pad. So if you're like jumping and whipping, and then try, which you're incentivized to do because you have this full air control to take advantage of, and then you like move the D-pad while you're jumping and whipping to like air control around. If you don't release the attack button before you start air controlling, the game is going to think you want to whip flail, and suddenly you're like flailing your whip around when you want it to be swinging your whip, and now you're not doing any damage to the thing you were trying to whip, and now you're like not doing what you want, and you just land, and it feels bad. So I don't know what the solution to that would be. I honestly think that whip flailing probably could have just been taken out of the game, and very little would have been lost, and the baseline movement in combat would have been greatly improved, because then players would actually be able to smoothly take advantage of the full air control while engaged in like normal combat. So if I don't really have a problem with the air control, if I don't have a problem with 8-directional whipping, if I'm not one of those people who says this game is too easy, what's my problem with it? Why is it in problem tier? Why are you saying this game is worse than Belmont's Revenge? So I spent a lot of time thinking about this, and the big problem with Super Castlevania IV is the level design. I hate the level design in Super Castlevania IV, because they gave Simon full air control, and they decided that because they had done this, they now had carte blanche to introduce as many boring, frustrating, disproportionately punishing platforming sections as their hearts desired, and their hearts desired plenty. The game is replete with environmental hazards. Level 2 is annoying. There's like tiny enemies everywhere that you can't hit. Not everywhere, but like frequently. But generally fine. Level 3 is god-awful. Boring platforming into more boring gimmicky platforming into more boring gimmicky platforming into a boss fight that's actually pretty cool, all while a complete I'm not going to go level by level, but like you get the idea. Actually I will mention level 4 because level 4 is also terrible. Like, I don't like anything about level 4, how it's designed. I don't like anything about how level 3 is designed. So I don't like the level design because it's very enamored with making you do platforming challenges and making you avoid environmental hazards. Sorry about that. There was a noise disturbance. I had to cut out some stuff. But what I was saying about the level design, I don't like the level design. I think that there's a thing that you can do sometimes in Super Castlevania IV where you like grapple your whip onto like a grapple point, and you can swing across a pit. And then if you get hit while you're doing that, you fall off of the grapple point and you fall into a death pit and you instantly die. And there's really no particular reason why you couldn't have just had the player jump across the pit there instead of having them engage in this like slippery, dangerous, annoying gimmick movement thing. I also think the boss fights are way too easy. If you walk into any boss fight in Super Castlevania IV with a triple shot cross, you will kill the boss. Like, there's no way you can't win, pretty much, if you go in with that tool. And full health. Like, the bosses are probably pretty hard to no damage, but just like if you're just doing like a deathless run or a 1cc, every single boss, with the exception of like the last 3, are just gonna fucking fall over in front. The last 4 are just gonna like fall over in front of you, which doesn't feel very rewarding because it doesn't feel like you did anything except you just got there and then you mindlessly mashed a button a couple times and then you just won. I think that the soundtrack is ridiculous or boring or mediocre. There's 1 or 2 good tracks. I like Simon's theme. I like the theme at the end of the game with the boss rush, and I like the credits music. The credits music is excellent. But most of the stuff in between is just like boring or annoying, in my opinion. But the real baffling decision that kind of means that I cannot possibly put Super Castlevania IV above problem tier, no matter how much I like anything else about it. And there are things I like about it, which I'm going to get to, but I just want to explain why this is here first. Is in level 8, there's this part at the end of level 8 where you have to walk across this series of platforms, and the platforms like will appear and disappear underneath your feet. And I learned when I revisited the game recently, that appearing and disappearing pattern for the platforms is completely random, and you can get there and you can like make smart decisions about when to go and when to keep moving on the bridge, and you can still just die because the platforms just aren't there. And that's like 40 minutes into the run, at the end of the most boring stage of the most boring, terrible level in the game. I'm actually not done talking about the level design because I forgot to talk about fucking level 8 until just now. Level 8 is so fucking terrible. It's so boring. It's just gray cave level full of nothing but slow-moving spikes, and then ending with a bullshit RNG disappearing platform bridge 40 minutes into your run that just randomly kills you. So I don't know how anybody can get to the end of level 8 and say that this game is the best game in the entire franchise. I just don't understand what planet you're from if you can look at that and think that that is better than like C1 or Dracula's Curse or anything like that. I really just don't get what I don't understand how people give this game a pass when its level design is just so obnoxious. And the levels last too long too. They all have like one more stage than they should. Or at the very least like one more room than they should, in my opinion. So I'm going to try to end on a positive note. What do I like about it? I will say this. So in Belmont's Revenge, I said that the beginning of the game was really excellent, and then it kind of falters at the very end. Super Castlevania IV is the opposite. I think the early game is awful. I think that the mid-game is annoying, and then gets unforgivably bad with level 8. I think level 9 is actually pretty good, barring like one or two minor annoyances, which for Super Castlevania IV is like an A+ if you only piss me off like once in the whole level. Then the clock tower is okay. Level B is terrible, because it's just like, it's the game throwing its last like stupid platforming gimmicks at you, where you have to walk on stairs that sometimes you just like randomly fall through for no reason that I can discern. But, at the very end of the game, at the very end of level B, you fight Slogra, Gaben, Death, and Dracula all in a row, and that stretch of the game is fantastic. The final boss rush in Super Castlevania IV is excellent, because it's finally taking advantage of the combat applications of all the new abilities it's given you. When you fight Dracula and Gaben and Death, you're finally taking advantage of 8-way whipping against enemies that can actually like fight back against you, instead of just like sitting out of their range and like plinking away at them, which is what you do with 8-way whipping most of the rest of the time. And you're like taking advantage of whip flailing to block Dracula's projectiles. You're like air controlling around to minutely control your positioning. It's like suddenly at the end of Super Castlevania IV, you're like actually playing a game. You're actually using the tools that were given to you. And it's like so insane to me that it was only in the last like 5 minutes of this hour-long game that the devs finally realized, oh, we should actually like reward the player for doing all this. We should actually, like we added all these extra combat options. We should actually create fun combat encounters instead of just making the player fucking jump around near spikes for 50 minutes like we were doing before. Like, it's insane, but it's also insanely good, that last stretch. And I think that the ending, the very end of the game when you kill Dracula and like the sunlight comes in through the window and the beautiful organ music starts playing over the credits, is sublime. Definitely the best, I would say the best ending in the entire series. But basically what I just said is that Super Castlevania IV only gets really like perfect when the credits are rolling, which is kind of like what they call damning with fine praise. So I'm very sorry, everybody. I'm very sorry that I don't feel the way about this game that other people do. That being said, I do acknowledge that, like, I can see how people could enjoy this. I could see how people, if they have a different level of tolerance for, like, stupid platforming, if that's what they find fun in games, then I can kind of see why people would love this game so much. I'm just not one of those people. It just does not click with me at all. So that's why it is where it is. And this is my tier list. So, sorry. Okay, we're back. Sorry for the jarring visual transition. I realized that the tier list was a little bit small. I made it as big as I could make it while still keeping all the tiers visible. And now, with Super Castlevania IV finally behind us, I'm going to move on to Castlevania Chronicles, which is going to go into good tier above Kid Dracula. So it's actually going to take me a little bit of time to explain like what this is. You may be wondering, Shovatar, if you're doing this tier list in release order, why is this PS1 game up here before like this SNES game and this Genesis game? It's because Castlevania Chronicles is actually a port of a game that originally came out in 1993 and only in Japan, that was just called Castlevania. Well, it was called the Kumajo Dracula, but it was released only in Japan and only for a particular gaming computer called the Sharp 68000, I believe. or X 68,000. So because of that, when people talk about the original version of Castlevania Chronicles, they call it Castlevania X 68K. And Chronicles itself is both the original Castlevania X 68K and then another version of it called Arrange Mode, where Simon looks different, Dracula looks different, and it's much, much easier. And for the purposes of this tier list, I'm basically just going to talk about the original what Castlevania Chronicles calls original mode, the 93 X68K game, because Arrange Mode is really only different in that it is much, well, it's easier. I guess I don't know if I could say much easier. Well, there's no damage knockback, so yeah, I'd say it's much easier. But again, I'm mostly just going to be talking about original mode here. So the reason why this game is not up here in great or excellent is because it's kind of at this strange place between like strategy and execution. And what I mean by that is that in Castlevania Chronicles, Simon Belmont does not have the full air control that he has in Super Castlevania IV. He can whip in a couple of more directions, mostly like downwards, so that way the axe isn't rendered irrelevant. But he has fixed jumping arcs. He can turn around in midair, but that has limited usefulness. And he's just like very the movement is very stiff again. But it doesn't have, because you're just Simon Belmont, because there's no companions, and also kind of like due to the way that the levels are designed, there's not that much in the way of like there's not much room for strategizing. The only decision you really have to make for any given level is basically like, do I want the cross or do I want the stopwatch? And usually the answer to that question is pretty obvious depending on the circumstances. Most of Castlevania Chronicles is execution focused, like moment to moment gameplay combat focused. But when you take like the basic modular stiff movement of the NES games and you whittle down the strategic elements of it by like nerfing the sub-weapons and by making the game like much more difficult in general, but like through the focus on execution, it doesn't really work as well. Like original mode of Chronicles is like so hard that it kind of crosses over into not being fun. And after tearing into Super Castlevania IV so much for its level design, I don't think Chronicles is nearly as bad on the level design front. It feels like you're actually playing a Castlevania game. You're not playing I don't know, like Mario with a guy who doesn't have any of Mario's like complex movement nuances. But level 2 of Chronicles is terrible. It's a boring, horrible cave level where they just throw bats at you endlessly, and then it ends with like a raft ride that just like kills you for no reason. And then level 8, at the very end of level 8 of Chronicles, there's an extremely tight jump you have to make to cross like this section of bridge that's kind of modeled after stage 16 in Castlevania 1. And the jump is so close that it kind of feels random. It doesn't feel like something that I could ever consistently clear, because so much of it just came down to like pixel quirks of like where your feet are, where you start, and whether you hold down the forward button for like an extra frame or something. So it's a really like unwarranted level of precision. So with all those criticisms expressed, why is it not down here in problem tier with Super Castlevania IV? Well, for one thing, as hard as it is, like, and as much as I call the level 8 jump like random, it never literally randomly kills the player. Like, the level 8 jump was something I did get better at as I played the game. There's not, like, at no point in Castlevania Chronicles does the game just, like, flip a fucking coin and decide that you're randomly gonna die. And also, Chronicles looks great. It's, like, one of the best-looking Castlevania games in the entire series, in my opinion. And it plays, like, it plays the way it's supposed to, which is kind of, like, frustratingly, oppressively difficult. And the soundtrack is also incredibly good. especially the arrange mode soundtrack, because the arrange mode also came with a new soundtrack, which is so like bombastic and forceful that it almost feels like arrange mode of Castlevania Chronicles is like a new music album disguised as a game. Like, the arrange mode soundtrack is spectacular. The original mode soundtrack is pretty good too. There's actually multiple original mode soundtracks, but now I'm getting into the details. So it looks great, sounds great, and and it never gets like so aggravating and inexplicable that I feel like I'm being trolled. Even though I think that's what the game is like trying to go for. So for all those reasons, it doesn't get down to like Super Castlevania IV levels of annoyance, and I think this is pretty much where I'm happy to put it. Okay, what's next? Oh man, all right, Rondo of Blood, everybody. This one is a shit. Hang on a sec. Bad, terrible game. No. Up at the tippy top, number 1. Rondo of Blood is the best Castlevania game ever released, and it's kind of hard to begin to express why that is. First of all, I guess I'll start at the most basic level, which is the surface level, which is the presentation. Rondo of Blood looks incredible, has almost the best soundtrack in the entire series. There's really only one other game that I think competes for it in that regard, which I'll get to eventually. And like, everything just looks so cool and is just conveyed so well, and the levels are all so beautifully detailed and distinct from each other, and everything and all that, and even like the cutscenes, as unnecessary as they are, I even like the cutscenes. I like the 90s anime aesthetic a lot. So going one level deeper, the basic gameplay of Rondo of Blood is like perfect. The movement is perfect. It has like, the pacing is perfect. The action is perfect. You're not on like, you are on fixed jumping arcs, like in C1 and C3 and Chronicles, but crucially, and this is actually so important, Richter can turn around in midair. And the reason this is so, without like interrupting his forward momentum. And the reason this is so important is because it means that you can move forward while like attacking or throwing a sub-weapon backwards, which has so many applications that I can't even begin to list them all. I also think that the game has pretty good sub-weapon balance. The axe is really good. I mean, the Bible is overpowered, obviously, but the axe is also like, but the Bible is not really available at all until level 3 if you take the main route, and then I think not available until level 6 if you take the alternate route. But now I'm kind of getting more detailed than I wanted to get into. I think that the... I do think that it's definitely on the easier end of Castlevania games in the series. Because this was the first game that introduced item crashes, which is when you have a particular sub-weapon, you can unleash like this super attack at the cost of a certain amount of hearts to either like clear out a room or do a bunch of damage to a boss. But they also don't drain your hearts at the end of each level, which means your heart count remains consistent through the entire game. And what that does is that introduces an element of game-wide strategy, where you can gather up and utilize your hearts in whatever way makes the most sense to you to deal with whatever turns out to be the biggest problem for you. So there's the opportunity, item crashes introduce this opportunity to make intelligent, strategic choices in a game where like the pacing and the combat is basically immaculate. So it kind of hits both the strategy and the execution marks more or less perfectly. And rather than focusing on like dumb platforming gimmicks and insta-kill spikes, Rondo of Blood really is all about like the boss fights. There's a couple of of particular like challenge rooms that are definitely more like more meant to be complicated regular enemy combat challenges, but centrally Rondo of Blood is about the boss fights, and the boss fights are excellent. Learning them is incredibly rewarding. You kind of have to learn them. Like, if you try to just spam item crashes through every boss in the game, like, there's not enough hearts for that, really. So you do have to actually learn them, and they're all relatively consistent, and they have a good level of difficulty to be challenging to the player without being, in my opinion, like, impossible. I think Rondo of Blood has a generally good level of difficulty, like, just for anybody who wants to jump in and play it. That being said, like, even though I am putting this at the very top of the tier list, there are issues which I'm gonna be fair and I'm gonna talk about. I do feel like item crashes are a little bit overpowered. Even though it does introduce this element of strategy with like managing your hearts, and it makes you think in a way that the other games really didn't. They are basically too good. And yes, you can't spam item crashes to kill every boss, but I really feel like you shouldn't be able to spam item crashes to kill any boss, with the exception of the werewolf enemy, because the werewolf enemy in Rondo of Blood, the werewolf boss in Rondo of Blood, is just a complete nutcase, and he just like freaks out the whole time, and he's basically begging you to just spam item crashes to kill him. So that's an exception, but generally I think that you shouldn't give the player that option. You should make the player actually engage with the bosses mechanically, instead of like giving them one or two just like get out of jail free cards in the form of like, well, you could actually fight this guy, or you could just spam the cross item crash like 3 times and spend 45 hearts and kill them. And 45 hearts is a big expenditure, but at the same time, I kind of don't feel like that that option being available at all is a good thing. Also, I mentioned an alternate route before. Rondo Blood has like a main route and an alternate route, and just like with Dracula's Curse, I think the main route is a lot better. The soundtrack is better, the level design is better and much less frustrating. The alternate route... Sorry, there's some more noise. The alternate route, as I was saying, has some pretty annoying sections where like you're on like floating rafts, and then like you have to, like, I'm mostly thinking about like alternate 4. And then, like, maybe parts of Alternate 5. Like, parts of Alternate 5 can just fuck you, but Alternate 5 is kind of, like, conceived from the ground up as, like, a weird, like, challenge level with no boss at the end. So that's makes it a little bit more forgivable, but all the same. The alternate route levels, I won't get too deep into the details, but the alternate route levels do have some annoying elements to them. Balanced somewhat by the fact that Alternate 5 has the best piece of music in arguably the entire series backing it. And the last problem that I would cite with Rondo of Blood is the Dracula fight at the very end is a little bit underwhelming. It's just kind of like a basic Castlevania 1 style Dracula fight where he's a guy and he teleports and he shoots fireballs and then he turns into a big goofy monster and jumps around. There's a little bit more going on to it than that, but not that much. And given how like bombastic and threatening and complicated a lot of the previous bosses are, it feels a little bit like an anticlimax. So those are the problems with it. However, the thing that makes Rondo special, the thing that gets Rondo into the #1 spot and that kind of overrides and overwhelms all of the criticisms I just leveled at it, is the other playable character, Maria, who is hilarious and who is extremely fun to play, even though she is preposterously overpowered. Her mere presence in Rondo of Blood as this like goofy, Genki, magical girl protagonist in the middle of this serious gothic action game is so wonderful and is unique throughout the series, and just adds this beautiful component of funny surrealism to the experience. Even if she is basically just a glorified easy mode, All the same, she's really funny and she's really fun, and I just love that she exists and is in the game. And the ending cutscene with Maria, where her cat meows at Dracula, is maybe the most perfect moment of the entire franchise. So Maria is the thing that bumps the game up to the #1 spot that it would already be competitive for anyway, even if she wasn't there, and kind of really cinches it. So Rondo, best game in the whole franchise, in my opinion. Pretty much really only competing with Dracula's Curse, because Dracula's Curse is so, like, vivid in my memory and so, like, special to me. And I think that's all I got to say about Rondo. Is there anything I forgot? Let me consult my notes real quick for a moment here. Nope, I think I covered everything. All right, great. Moving on. So I'm gonna go out of release order again here. This is the Dracula X Chronicles. This is a game that was released for the PSP. I'm going to put it in problem tier. The reason I'm talking about this PSP game right after this 1993 TurboGrafx game, or PC Engine technically, is because this was basically like a mid-2000s remake of Rondo of Blood, where it plays the same, but they replaced all of Rondo's beautiful graphics with, like, ugly, like, PSP/Nintendo DS, like, 3D models, and the downgrade in presentation is so catastrophic that the fact that that DXC added a couple of, like, new gameplay elements to its Rondo remake, like there's a different alternate level 5, there's, like, a new boss, Dracula has, like, a third form, it's just irrelevant because the game is just so ugly. Oh, and also the new alternate level 5 got rid of the music, it doesn't include the music from the alternate 5 from Rondo, which is just a completely baffling decision. You have to go, like, hunting for collectibles in the game to, like, make the soundtrack better, when they could have just made the soundtrack better from the start. So, this might seem like a gigantic, like, gap for something as petty as it looks bad, but I just hate looking at it, and I don't see any reason for it to exist when Rondo of Blood exists. And it's just more, like, dour and pointless. I'm sorry to say. Okay, nothing really more to say about that. What else? Okay, Castlevania Bloodlines. This is a legendary game. So Castlevania Bloodlines was a game that I played. When I first played it, I was like, this game is fucking great. This game is fucking amazing. Then like, after I played it, as, like, my memory of it kind of faded, I was like, why did I like this game so much? Why did I, like, give this game so much praise? And then I played it again recently for, like, this revisitation span that my channel was doing. That's a terrible, awkward way to phrase this. I was revisiting games that I'd played before. And when I got back to Castlevania Bloodlines, I was like, oh, it's because this game plays, like, fucking perfectly. Like, Bloodlines has movement that's very similar to Rondo movement, and the pacing is very similar to Rondo pacing. It's fast, it's action-oriented, there's even more of an emphasis on boss fights, because there's a ton of, like, mini-bosses in Castlevania Bloodlines. The soundtrack is not as good as Rondo, and I don't think it looks as good as Rondo. It still looks pretty damn good, though, and the soundtrack is kind of hit or miss for me. I know a lot of people love this game's soundtrack and say the soundtrack is, like, the best in the whole series, and I kind of see where they're coming from, but I don't really agree. I especially think, like, the level 3 music is actually really annoying. But the rest of it is definitely very memorable, if not like, not necessarily my favorite in the whole series. The other thing about Bloodlines that's important to note is that in terms of the challenge, it's definitely a lot harder than Rondo. It really makes you... And that combined with the higher emphasis on execution and on action really makes it feel. It has a unique feel. It doesn't feel like any other game in the series entirely. I'd say the game that it feels the closest to is Rondo, but it's kind of even more harrowing and even more demanding, and you could say, I think, even more creative in terms of the level design and the enemy and the boss design. So why isn't it up and runner-up? Why isn't it superseding Rondo of Blood as the best game in the series? Well, there's, like I said, there is more of an emphasis on like execution and action, but there's really almost no strategizing in the game. You do retain your gems between, they're gems in Bloodlines instead of hearts, I don't know why. You do retain gems between levels, but there's really basically never any reason that I could ever find to use anything besides the axe if you were going to play in terms of like sub-weapon choices. And because there's no item crashes, your gems are not like a super valuable resource unless you damage the game, in which case you will have consistent access to like a magical super upgraded whip and then like a magical super attack that costs 8 hearts per usage. If you damage it, then it kind of attains this like strategic element of when do I use this, when do I hold on to this. But like barring that, it really kind of doesn't. The other thing about Bloodlines that's keeping it from like breaking out into like the absolute highest echelon of the series is that the other playable character, Eric Lacard, is kind of underwhelming in my opinion. He's a little bit like Grant from Dracula's Curse in that. So what Eric does is he has this like really, he can jump really high up into the air. He has this like vertical super jump, which can let you like skip certain parts of the game. It opens up a couple of new combat options on a couple of the bosses. But really, like, the game doesn't give you that many opportunities to take advantage of it. And the spots where you can take advantage of it are mostly fairly obvious, so it doesn't really reward, like, thinking very much about the level design, in my opinion. And also, Eric does less damage than John, which just doesn't, like, feel good. So there is another playable character in Bloodlines, but I don't really know. Something was missing with Eric, and I don't know what it was exactly. I don't know what like more they could have done to make him more distinct and like more exciting, but like something was just not there in my opinion. So fucking amazing game. Shoe in for top 5 of the series, but not quite at the very highest level. Absolutely blows Super Castlevania IV out of the water in every metric, and that's not nice to say, but it's my belief. Okay, have I covered everything about Bloodlines? Yeah, I think so. I mentioned the boss fights. I should say the boss fights are mostly like really good. I like the Dracula fight in Bloodlines a lot. It's very harrowing and very demanding. There's a couple of, like, kind of obnoxious gimmicks with Bloodlines. Like, in level 6, the room where you're upside down is a little bit silly and kind of frustrating, but that's fine. You know, it's kind of like trying to be difficult in as many different ways as it can, so I guess that's okay. Oh yeah, and John Morris looks really goofy. He's like very broad-shouldered. He looks like a football player. I don't know if that's a criticism exactly. It's just something that I never stopped noticing. Okay, I think I'm ready to move on. Dracula X for the Super Nintendo. This one's going up in excellent tier, and this may shock some of you that this game is this high up on the tier list. Above Super Castlevania IV, above Castlevania 1, higher in the tier than Castlevania 1, but honestly, this game is not that bad. the biggest thing it has against it, in my opinion, is the slower movement speed, because Richter does move more slowly in Dracula X than he does in Rondo of Blood. He doesn't move as slowly as I thought he did when I first played the game, but he does move more slowly. And that is an issue. Rondo of Blood, or Dracula X rather, is sort of like, it kind of feels more like a successor to Castlevania 1 than it does like a successor to Rondo necessarily. Like, the fact that Richter moves more slowly and the fact that the game is so much more threatening and so much more dangerous means that you don't quite have the super fast Bloodlines or Rondo style pacing. But the item crashes are still in Dracula X, and the item crashes are arguably more impactful than ever before because Dracula X is so much harder than Rondo of Blood. So there's also like strategic elements to it in terms of like resource management, in terms of like your hearts, but also just like how you navigate the levels, because they're laid out to be so challenging and to sort of throw like every like tricky Castlevania level combat element at you. There's lots of like vertical platforms going up and down in Dracula X. There's lots of verticality. There's lots of respawning Medusa heads and like birds coming at you. It's really just kind of like a Castlevania nightmare. And you might be wondering at this point, Shovatar, you preposterous hypocrite, you spent like 10 minutes saying that the level design in Super Castlevania IV was shitty and frustrating and horrible, and so now you're talking about Dracula X, the game where the level design is specifically meant to aggravate you, and you're praising it, and you're putting it 3 tiers higher than Super Castlevania IV. What's wrong with you? What kind of brain parasite do you have? Well, the difference is in the solutions. The solutions to the platforming challenges in Super Castlevania IV are like, just don't walk off of the edge of the platforms, or just like sit there and wait. Or in the case of the A2 disappearing platform, just fucking get lucky. You can defeat the problems that Dracula X throws at you using your brain. You can say, this part's really tricky, I'm gonna item crash here. Or like, this part's really dangerous, I'm gonna play it super slow to make sure that like I jump right after I kill the Medusa head, so that way I know I'm not gonna jump into a Medusa head as it respawns. Or like, you know, this boss is really tricky, but I can learn his pattern and get him down that way. Or, you know, if I absolutely have to, I can use the item crashes. Like, the solutions to Dracula X are all solutions of combat strategy and like positioning and sub-weapon selection and resource management. They're not solutions of just don't walk off the platform, or just sit there and wait with your thumb up your ass, or just get lucky, which is what the solutions are for the Super Castlevania IV's level design. That's a really important difference, because one of those two things feels like you're actually playing a game, and it is Dracula X that gives me more of that feeling. Dracula X is also just like, I mean, the soundtrack is pretty good. Obviously, it's a lot of like songs from Rondo of Blood moved over to the SNES, so it doesn't sound as good because it's not like on a PC Engine CD or anything like that. But, you know, the compositions are the same, the compositions are fine. The presentation of Dracula X overall is not as good as Rondo of Blood, but for what it is, Dracula X is a really good game, in my opinion. I would highly recommend, if you're playing it on emulator, getting the ROM hack that slows down Richter's walk cycle, because otherwise it looks like he has to take like 2 million steps to get a quarter across the screen, and it makes him look slower than he actually is, and it's very jarring. So yeah, this might shock some of you to see this listed as high as it is, but that's honestly what I think after replaying it, after learning it, after taking the time to get good at it. I think it's a game that is definitely very, very difficult and can be very, very frustrating, but ultimately, it is within your power as a video game player to overcome those challenges in Dracula X. That's just my opinion. Okay, so on the heels of that stunning upset by Dracula X to make it all the way up into excellent tier, next up we have Symphony of the Night, which is also going to go up into excellent tier, above Castlevania 1, but actually below Dracula X. And before you all blow a gasket, give me a little bit of time to explain my opinion about Symphony of the Night in general. So Symphony of the Night definitely deserves excellent tier. It was something that I feel like you very rarely see in video game franchises nowadays, at least among whichever franchises are still alive, which is a complete and total, like, change of pace and just a completely fresh idea for the entire series. And you might be saying, well, what about Simon's Quest? Simon's Quest had, you know, non-linear environments and RPG elements before, but, like, Simon's Quest and Symphony of the Night really are not, like, comparable games, in my opinion. Not just in terms of quality, but also just in, like, how they're structured and kind of, like, how they feel. Like, Simon's Quest, in my opinion, is really kind of its own thing. I don't really categorize it as, like, a Metroidvania or an Egavania. Maybe you might disagree, dear viewer, but that's my opinion. So, why do I think it deserves to be up in excellent tier? Well, the thing about Symphony of the Night that makes it really, really good is the pacing. And pacing is something that I've talked about with previous games, and that I'm going to bring up again, where Symphony of the Night is just really, really well-paced, a really, really well-paced game. It's very brisk. You never spend too much time in one environment or killing the same enemy. Especially if you take advantage of Alucard's, this very specific thing that Alucard can do, and I'm getting into the details, but this is important in a broad sense, which is that Alucard can do this thing where, like, he can do a falling slash, and then as soon as he hits the ground and he's crouching, that will, like, cancel the cooldown of the first attack, and then he can do a second slash on the ground. And that's just a really important tool for basically doing, like, 2 hits really, really quickly when you would otherwise only be able to do 1. And speaking of Alucard's sword, that, to me, is almost as groundbreaking a shift of gameplay style as the swap to the non-linear exploration-focused gameplay, is the fact that Alucard has a sword instead of a whip. Now, you had characters prior to this who did not have whips. You had Maria in Rondo, but Maria's birds aren't really like Alucard's sword at all. And what the sword does is that it trades out the classic Belmont wind-up animation for almost instant activation. Like, you press the button, he just swings. At the cost of the longer range. Not that Alucard's sword is, like, too short or anything, at least not, well, at the beginning it kind of is, or if you have, like, a knife, it's pretty short. But if you use, like, a regular long sword, like the weapons, most of the weapons that are accessible to Alucard throughout the castle, then you're not going to have any range issues. So those are, like, the two big changes in Symphony of the Night, are the Metroid style, getting new things to open up new parts of the castle, and then just the basic combat feeling different. And the game just has this wonderful atmosphere. The soundtrack is pretty good. It has it has 1 or 2, like, really, really excellent tracks, and then, like, some that are more, like, environmental and low-key, which is fine, but not really what where my tastes trend towards. But the thing that gives Castlevania Symphony of the Night, like, an extra bump up into excellent tier, the thing that makes it special, in my opinion, are actually the cutscenes and the original English dub with all the goofy dialogue, which is iconic in its own right. I'm sure even those of you who are watching it who haven't even played Symphony of the Night have heard the lines that people always quote from Symphony of the Night. Die, monster, you don't belong in this world, etc., etc., etc. I'm not going to do the whole thing for you. And normally, like, I wouldn't take something like that into account with a game, because I try to keep myself much more focused on, like, the gameplay. But you know, I'll admit that there is something about that element of Symphony of the Night that makes it special, and sort of the whole feel it gives off. And the game looks beautiful, of course. You can't have any issues with how Symphony of the Night looks, in my opinion. So, why is it only an excellent tier? Why is it below Dracula X of all things, you monster? So, Symphony of the Night was a departure from classic Castlevania in many ways, but I would say one of the biggest differences is the level of difficulty in Symphony of the Night. Alucard in Symphony of the Night is basically just overpowered. He's not overpowered in the way that Maria was, where Maria in Rondo of Blood was overpowered because she just killed everything, and she had so much more mobility than Richter has, and just kind of like decimates these levels that are clearly designed for more of a Belmont protagonist. With Alucard, he does kill things really fast, but honestly, Alucard's biggest advantage in Symphony of the Night is just the fact that he's so tanky. He has so much health, he has armor to make himself take less damage, and he already doesn't take that much damage. And then you can find energy tanks, health upgrades to give yourself even more HP on top of what you already have, plus the defensive bonuses from armor. So Alucard, it's just very hard to die when you play as Alucard in Symphony of the Night. There's like maybe one or two exceptions. Some of the bosses can hit you pretty hard. The Minotaur werewolf boss in the Colosseum is kind of a difficulty spike for some people that I've heard about. But generally speaking, like, the level of difficulty has gone way, way down. And in a sense, that's good if you think of it in the context of this is a game that's supposed to reward exploration. You know, you don't want to make things feel too dangerous to the point that the player feels de-incentivized to explore. But at the same time, it means that it kind of gets dull pretty quickly. And this is in contrast to to prior games in the series, which are usually just so fun to play at baseline that they have a lot of replay value, even if they don't have any real RPG elements. And I don't really think of Symphony of the Night as having that many like RPG elements, to be honest. I saw somebody on some message board say Symphony of the Night has build variety, and I would love to know what the fuck that guy was talking about, because I can't even begin to guess what that could mean. So number one, it's basically too easy, which is, I would say, a very minor complaint overall, because, I mean, I've got fucking Rondo of Blood in number one spot. I don't need a game to be super difficult to be a good game. But the other big problem is that Symphony of the Night is divided up into two halves, really more like there's like an extra third of the game at the, after you fight Richter in the Castle Keep, you go to the Reverse Castle, and the Reverse Castle, it really kind of the game really takes a hit when you get to the Reverse Castle. The pacing that had before been really good sort of suffers because the Reverse Castle's geometry is such that you have to do a lot of navigation in bat form, which is very slow, or mist form, which is also very slow. And I know you can super jump, but the super jump takes you literally straight up and down. So unless you're just trying to do a straight jump up to something above you, then you're going to have to go into bat form, and then you're going to have to flap around and take forever. The other problem with the Reverse Castle is that what I said before about the soundtrack in Symphony of the Night being kind of like occasionally really good, in the Reverse Castle you're listening to like the same incredibly dull track throughout like 60% of the castle's environments. So once you get to that part of the game, I think it takes a serious nosedive. I mean, for what it's worth, the Reverse Castle is iconic. It's one of the most famous things about Symphony of the Night, and it's a really cool idea, and there's almost like this this impressive brashness to even put that idea in the game, because that's almost like an idea you would have as a joke, but like they actually did it. And it turned out okay. Like, it could have been worse, but I think most people who've played the game would agree that the Reverse Castle is where things kind of get a little bit, there's a little bit of a hit in terms of the game's like I said, pacing and the other things that make the game good. But it's not a bad way to tack on another, like, hour or hour and a half onto the runtime. And like I said before, it's something that a lot of people that is iconic and is sort of emblematic of Symphony of the Night. So that's a downside, but it's not too much of one. So that's why it's not quite in legendary tier, because I think it doesn't quite reach like the level of like Bloodlines where there's almost nothing wrong with it. There are things wrong with it. There's balance concerns, there's pacing concerns in the second half, so unfortunately it doesn't quite reach that level. But that being said, it was the first game in the series to introduce like alternate, so it introduced like Metroidvania, Igavania style gameplay, and also had an alternate mode, Richter mode. I also don't like Richter mode, but if I was better at the game, then I would probably think it was really good. Because basically your success or failure in Symphony of the Night Richter mode hinges pretty heavily on your ability to do a certain input combo that I'm pretty bad at, but if I was better at, then would probably make the alternate mode really fun. So I think that's about all I have to say. I guess I might talk a little bit about the Saturn version, and the Dracula X Chronicle, the PSP game, also had like a new version of Symphony of the Night. They're not really materially different in any way, I would say. There's like a couple of new zones in the Saturn version, but they're not super interesting. They're mostly irrelevant. And the PS1 version is definitely the version that I think would be preferred, just because the Saturn version has like issues with loading times. There's a patch somebody released, like a ROM hack, to make the Saturn version of Symphony of the Night not run like quite as badly and make the load times not quite as awful, but it still is a difference, and I don't think the additions that were made to the Saturn version are worth that extra hit to the pacing. You can play as Maria in the Saturn version, though, which is pretty neat as a novelty. You can play as Maria in the Dracula X Chronicles version too, but Maria in DXC just sucks. She doesn't do any fucking damage. So I think that's all I have to say about Symphony of the Night. Let's move on to Castlevania Legends. Bad. This is like not a good game. My notes that I took for this video, under Castlevania Legends, there's just one bullet point, and it says boring. So I'm just gonna leave it at that. The game is just like not really interesting in any way, shape, or form. So sorry, Castlevania Legends. Sorry, Sonia Belmont, protagonist of Castlevania Legends, who is now non-canon. I guess I'll give this fun fact instead of talking about the game, because the game's so boring to talk about. Sonia Belmont, who you can kind of see here, was supposed to be the protagonist of a Castlevania Dreamcast game called, I think, Castlevania Resurrection, which unfortunately was never finished. And it was going to involve her, like, resurrecting in the 1800s, hence the subtitle, and I don't really remember what else that game was going to be about, just a little piece of trivia. Speaking of 3D Castlevania, okay, now I have something interesting to talk about. Castlevania 64. Castlevania 64. Where's it going to go? Where's it going to go? Great. I'm not kidding. For those of you who haven't watched any of my Castlevania 64 videos, I actually really like Castlevania 64. I'll get the elephant in the room right out of the way right at the start. Yes, this game is replete with problems. There are camera issues, there are control issues to a certain extent, there's lots of awkwardness and imperfection, and a couple of really annoying platforming, especially towards the end game of C64. But and the big thing to mention, because a lot of people bring this up too about Castlevania 64 specifically, is that the opening level is like boring as fuck. You're walking through like the same identical forest environments like 4 times, fighting infinitely respawning skeletons. I know all about all of these problems with this game. I have played Castlevania 64 enough times to be intimately familiar with the things about it that are bad, with the things about it that don't really work properly. But all the same, there it is in great tier. and I'm going to give two primary defenses of the game and for its place and its placement there. So the first one is, I would say, lackluster opening level, yes. Boring. Although it is topped off by the appearance of skeletons riding motorcycles in 1850-something, which I think kind of makes up for everything that came before it. But the second one, and the big one, is just atmosphere, atmosphere, atmosphere. Castlevania 64, even for someone like me playing it for the first time in 2023, really does an excellent job of, like, immersing you in this environment in a way that only a game in the three-dimensional medium could accomplish, in my opinion. And I think that's actually exemplified in my favorite level in the whole game, which is the villa, where you're walking through this, like, spooky mansion, and there's all these, like, cool little details, and even the cutscenes are kind of fun. So and this is what makes praise of Castlevania 64 difficult to convey verbally, because its most powerful element, the biggest factor in its favor, is something that has to be felt, and that can't really be explained, like, logically or rationally. It's just kind of like you get into the game and you're just, like, in it in a way that you're not with other games in the franchise. And you can say that I'm just a moron who's being wowed by terrible graphics from 1999, and you are entitled to your opinion. I am also entitled to my opinion. I would also say that Castlevania 64, I guess another thing that I should bring up is that people were saying, you might say, Shovatar, you were talking a bunch of shit about the platforming in Super Castlevania IV. Why aren't you talking shit about the platforming in Castlevania 64? The reason is because in Castlevania 64, like, the combat is sort of secondary. The exploration and the platforming is much more central to the game. The game is centrally a platformer, because the combat is kind of, like, awkward and imperfect and not terribly complex. So I kind of accept it if that's the game's identity. The thing about Super Castlevania IV that made it so disappointing was that I felt like if it was a game with more of an emphasis on action and combat the way Bloodlines or Rondo were, then it would have had more of an opportunity to take advantage of the tools that were available to you. In Castlevania 64, it's a fucking good thing that the combat's not any more complicated than it is and isn't any more of a focus, because it's pretty awkward. Another thing that I would say about Castlevania 64 is that Reinhardt, there's two playable characters, Reinhardt and Carrie. I personally really prefer playing as Reinhardt. I like the whip better than Carrie's magic projectiles, but each of the two have their own individual stages, so if you do play the game, which I would recommend, you should play as both of them at least once. Carrie actually has my favorite level in the whole game, which is the Tower of Sorcery, which is fucking hard as hell, and it's just a platforming, like, nightmare, but it's very memorable, and it's very vibrant, and it really sticks out in my mind, and I have a lot of affection for it. So yes, I actually really like Castlevania 64. Given all of its problems, I really can't put it any higher than this. I can't say that it's on par with Symphony of the Night or anything like that. But still, like definitely better than I had been led to believe. Even the Nitro run, where you have to, like, walk around with this, like, explosive on you, is really not that bad. It is pretty annoying, but it's not terrible, and the game just has so much else going for it that it makes up for a few big speed bumps. Castlevania Legacy of Darkness, basically the same game, so it's going in basically the same spot. The only differences are, in Legacy of Darkness you can play as a dogman. He has more stages. Castlevania Legacy of Darkness improved the camera, improved the combat, improved some of the level design. Like, they replaced the forest level from Castlevania 64 with a different one that has some music and is a little bit more, like, trying to keep the pacing up a little bit more. There's fewer infinitely respawning enemies in Legacy of Darkness. There's like more boss fights in there. So I would put Legacy of Darkness ahead of Castlevania 64 as basically a better version of it, but that's actually very narrow because Castlevania Legacy of Darkness, like I said, revamped several levels from Castlevania 64, but like in my opinion, for every level that they improved, they made another level worse. Like for example, I talked about the Tower of Sorcery with Carrie, and I like the Castlevania 64 Tower of Sorcery way better than the Legacy of Darkness Tower of Sorcery. And this is like a detail thing, but I'm illustrating that there are people who will say that Legacy of Darkness is just like a straight upgrade from C64, and I really don't agree with that. I think they are distinct games, and Legacy of Darkness kind of only barely beats out C64, in my opinion. Just because there are, like, I can think of one or two places in particular where it's like, okay, yeah, changing the camera for that particular boss encounter is just kind of like too big of an objective upgrade. Legacy of Darkness also has a really cool opening cutscene, which is worth something in a game that's basically carried 100% by its atmosphere. And I think that's all I have to say about Legacy of Darkness. Like, there is actually more of an emphasis on combat in Legacy of Darkness. There's a couple of boss fights that feel like they're actual, like, combat encounters. And there are some like that in Castlevania 64 too, but they're harder in Legacy of Darkness and they hit harder. So I think there's more of an emphasis to make combat something that can actually kill you in Legacy of Darkness, which is basically never going to happen in C64. The only way you're liable to die in C64 is with platforming. That's like also going to be the case like 80 or 90% of the time in Legacy of Darkness too. But that's 80% is not 100%. Okay, I think that's everything to do with the N64 games. Unfairly maligned, in my opinion. So now we move on to the GBA trilogy. First up on the chopping block, Circle of the Moon. Circle of the Moon, unfortunate. This is an incredibly easy ranking for me. And I feel like this is also maybe controversial. I don't know. I feel like, because sometimes I do see people on message boards sometimes like defending this game and making excuses for it. And I kind of have to like give a little disclaimer here, which is that, you know, this tier list is just my opinion. That should go without saying. But I know how people on the internet are about like video games, and obviously that doesn't mean that like, you know, you can't like disagree with me. The whole point of opinions is that everybody has one, and different people think different things. And there are some opposing opinions that I understand. Like people who say, I hate Dracula X, I get it, because I hated Dracula X when I first played it. People who say, you know, I hate Belmont's Revenge because of the slow movement speed, totally get it. People who say, you know, I love Super Castlevania IV because I love the atmosphere and I love the pacing, the adventurous feel, and I love how it looks, and I love the soundtrack. Okay, you know, like music is one of those things that is more subjective than most other aspects of video games. People who defend Circle of the Moon are very hard for me to understand, because there's defending a game, and then I think there's a point where it kind of crosses over into making excuses for it. And let me talk a little bit about the game so you guys know like what the hell I'm talking about if you've never played the game. So Circle of the Moon was the first Castlevania game to iterate on the Symphony of the Night, Metroidvania, Igavania gameplay style. And so it had some feeling out to do. It had some experimentation to do to figure out what worked, what didn't work, what do we keep from Symphony of the Night, what do we try to improve. And at baseline, I think that Circle of the Moon tried to respond directly to two of what I would imagine would be common criticisms of Symphony of the Night. Because if you play Symphony of the Night, I can envision people saying, well, this is good, but it doesn't feel like Castlevania because you're not a guy with a whip. And I can also imagine people saying, like I said, this is a cool game, but it's too easy. And Circle of the Moon wanted to address both of those factors. Maybe also wanted to address the fact that there basically is no real like RPG element in Symphony of the Night, in my humble opinion. So Circle of the Moon has two major problems, and one of these problems I can understand as from a standpoint of like difference of opinion, difference in taste, and the other one I can't. So at the very basic level, I hate the way that Circle of the Moon controls. You do have a whip-wielding protagonist again, which gives you a little bit more flexibility to position yourself and to deal with enemies. The problem there, and this is more of a balancing problem, and this is a bit of a digression, but the problem really with the whip in Circle of the Moon is that it doesn't do any fucking damage. Like, the whip in Circle of the Moon is fucking terrible. But that's a slight digression. I don't like the way it controls. Nathan jumps basically straight up and down when he jumps, or he can jump forward but only if you dash, and in Circle of the Moon you have to dash by double tapping the D-pad or like double tapping the arrow keys if you're playing on emulator. I really don't like that at all. I don't see any reason why that should be in the game. Richter mode in Symphony of the Night did the same thing, and I think it was a terrible idea there too. So that is more of like a personal opinion type thing. So, like, some people just don't care. Some people are like, I don't care about the double tapping to dash, I just do it, it doesn't bother me. Okay, you know, alright, that's fine. But the other thing about Circle of the Moon that really I don't understand is the DSS system, and I'm gonna have to get detailed here, just because I need to talk about this to explain my opinion, to explain why it's in this tier. So the way that Circle of the Moon works is that there are these different magical cards you can find. And the magical cards give the protagonist, Nathan Graves, different abilities. The thing is that these magical cards are, dropped randomly from enemies. So if you play through Circle of the Moon, you have two choices. You can either not farm for any specific cards and just go through the game with whatever happens to drop for you, or you can specifically farm for certain cards to get certain abilities. So you might say, well, farming is basically like anti-gameplay and it's horribly boring, so the correct decision to make is just to take whatever you get, right? Well, that is one way you could play Circle of the Moon. I have two issues with that. Number one, on a practical level, some cards are way better than others. Some card combos are way better than others. So, depending on how lucky you get in the run, that is going to directly impact the nature of the experience that you have in the game. And you might be thinking, well, that sounds great for replay value. And it does on paper, but listen to what I said. I said some combos are better than other ones, not different combos give you different equivalent options to tackle obstacles and to solve problems with the same level of efficacy. No, there are some that are just better than others. And if you wanna tell me that I don't know, that like Golem and Golem and Cockatrice are just as good as like Mandragora and Manticore, or that like Apollo and what's a good example? Apollo and Diana are just as good as Jupiter and Venus. Feel free to make your case, but you're not convincing me. And so then the other option, and the second objection I have to just taking whatever the game gives you, is something that I've mentioned already in this video, is that what I like about video games is I like it when my decisions impact my success. I like it when I'm able to accomplish a task or overcome a challenge because of decisions that I made. Because I made the correct decision to get this certain ability and to use this certain ability in this certain way to accomplish this certain outcome. So I do not at all like it when games take away that choice, or, as Circle of the Moon does, lock that choice behind farming, where if I want to get to a certain boss with a certain card combo with certain tools, then I need to farm for those cards, and the drop rates in Circle of the Moon are fucking god-awful. They're terrible. If you want to farm for a certain card, you're going to be doing that for a while. So, and here's what people say that I don't understand. They say, but Chauvitar, you don't need to farm, so don't do it. You don't need to even play the game. It's not about what you need to do and what you don't need to do. It's about what's fun to do, and it's about does the game, and what does the game incentivize you to do? If the game is locking fun and interesting combat tools and options and choices behind farming, why would you do that? Why would you make it random instead of just letting me pick it? And what some people would say is, well, replay value. Well, like I said before, the way that replay value plays out in practice is that just on some runs, you're worse at the game than you are in other runs. Is that fun? Is it fun to just randomly suck? I don't get it. But the weirdest thing that people say about Circle of the Moon on the internet is that you're not, quote, supposed to farm. Like, you're not like, the game is telling you, here's a really great, really effective, fun tool, and then we're going to put it behind a random drop-off of an enemy, but you're not supposed to farm for it. That seems like a breakdown in logic there. And furthermore, if you're not supposed to farm for the cards in Circle of the Moon at all, like, period, ever, why do Uranus and Pluto even exist? And that's not going to make sense to you unless you've played the game, but if you've played the game, like, you know damn well there's no such thing as a natural Uranus drop, and there's no such thing as a natural Pluto drop. You cannot get those cards unless you farm. Unless you go out of your way specifically to where you know they're going to drop and you farm them. So, if the devs really would have just been horrified at the very notion of the player farming for cards in Circle of the Moon, why the fuck are those even in the game? And I'll throw Saturn onto that too, because there's basically no such thing as a natural Saturn drop either. So, I think people talk about this game in a way that it makes no sense to me, because they're saying things that seem to be just patently wrong. So if I hate the game that much, though, why is it, like, above Simon's Quest? Well, because Circle of the Moon actually does have something that I suggested where there's a mode you can unlock after you beat the game once called Magician Mode, where you do start off with access to all the cards that can drop. And the downside, though, is that you do less, like, physical damage, which I don't like. But it is definitely, like, a more fun way to play the game, because now you're actually taking advantage of the system that the game is, like, completely designed around, and is basically the only thing about it that's interesting. And you're not just, like, running through the game with, like, Mercury Salamander and then, like, maybe 2 other cards the whole time, like you would be if you were just going for if you're just, like, going off of nat drops. That's something of an exaggeration, but, like, that shit happens. And, like, something like whether Jupiter drops for you in the clock tower or not, for example, can, in my opinion, make a gigantic difference on the whole, on the trajectory of your run. And there are, like, ROM hacks. There's, like, patches you can apply to, like, make card drops consistent, or just make them, like available in the castle where you explore them, and also, like, ROM hacks to, like, fix the double tapping to dash, but, like, that means nothing to me. Why should I have to download 4 ROM hacks to make this game playable? Why didn't they just design the game better? That would be my counter to that. And why would I download 4 ROM hacks to make Circle of the Moon playable when I could just play Harmony of Dissonance instead, which is going to go all the way up here in Legendary tier. Harmony of Dissonance is an incredibly good game. And much like how Circle of the Moon felt like it was trying to address Symphony of the Night in a well-intentioned but ultimately disastrous way with some of its decisions, Harmony of Dissonance kind of feels like it's directly addressing Circle of the Moon. And what I mean by that is that the two biggest issues that I listed with Circle of the Moon, which were the DSS system, the incentivization of farming, and then the movement, are both addressed in Harmony of Dissonance in a really big way, where Harmony of Dissonance has, you are never incentivized to farm. You can, but there's like basically never any reason to. You have all the same tools no matter what. You have access to the same abilities and the same spells, based off of like which sub-weapons you pick up and then which magic books you get. And the magic books that you can get in Harmony of Dissonance are, get this, they're just spaced throughout the castle, and you just find them by exploring and finding them, and then when you find them, you just have them, and now you can use them. You don't have to fucking kill a Thunder Demon, kill between 1 to 25 Thunder Demons to get the fucking thing you want. The game just gives it to you, so you can actually make the choice to use it or not. Go figure, who could have come up with such a revolution in game design? You just get the thing that you can use. You just get it. Wow. Incredible. And then the second thing is that Harmony of Dissonance has the best movement in the entire series, in my opinion. And remember what I said towards the very beginning of this video, which is that movement in video games is like the most important thing in a video game because it's what you're doing all the time. In Harmony of Dissonance, Juiced Belmont does have like fixed forward jumping arcs that can be a little bit like floaty and a little bit tough to get used to. Like there's definitely something of a learning curve in terms of how Juiced feels to control in Harmony of Dissonance. But once you get a handle on it, it's perfectly fine, and it's like the normal forward arc Belmont jump. But the important thing about Juiced is that he comes with this like dash ability where you can like zoom around really, really fast from the very beginning of the game. And also, this is like a detail, but I have to talk about it because it relates to this. Very early on in the game, Juiced gets a slide kick attack. And what's important about the slide kick is that the slide kick will do just as much damage as his whip does, barring any elemental upgrades. Which means that it's very easy for you to keep track of when you can slide kick through enemies. Because the slide kick, if it kills an enemy, you'll go right through them. If it doesn't kill them, you'll bounce off them and take damage. So the fact that the slide kick does this consistent and pretty high amount of damage means that it can actually be incorporated into gameplay in a way that's very natural, and that's very consistent, and that's really, really fun. And it just keeps the pacing up so much more. Like, just moving around the castle in Harmony of Dissonance is incredibly fun. And also, like, it just doesn't do anything that wrong to drag it down because of that. The combat is great. In terms of just strategic decisions you can make, you pick a sub-weapon, and each sub-weapon kind of comes with its own arsenal of related elemental spells, which also kind of open up as the game goes along. You get more access to more spell books, you can get more abilities like that. But some of you who have been screaming at your computer screen for the past 10 minutes or 5 minutes or however long I've been talking about Harmony of Dissonance and gushing over it, there's a reason why it's underneath Bloodlines. There's a reason why it's not number 1 or number 2. The game does have problems. Number 1 at the very top would definitely be like the visuals and the music, which are a little bit wonky. I don't really mind the visuals so much, and I think that the music composition is pretty good mostly. There's a lot of sort of mediocre like environmental tracks, which are kind of emblematic of a lot of the Igavanias, in my opinion. But the compositions themselves aren't offensive. It's just kind of the way that it sounds. I don't know what went wrong exactly, but the music in Harmony of Dissonance kind of sounds like it could be coming out of a Game Boy, like a regular Game Boy speaker. I don't really know what that's all about, but that is a problem that I definitely acknowledge, and that a lot of other people bring up. Also, I think that you can pick up different sub-weapons. You do have different options to pick from, and different like assorted magical spell, groups of magical spells you can use that are associated with each sub-weapon. But the balance is really not great. I actually did a whole other tier list video all about like ranking Harmony of Dissonance spells and sub-weapons and a bunch of other things, and there's basically no reason not to just use the Bible for the whole game and then use the knife when you fight Maxime and then basically never worry about it. I mean, to be fair, the other spells are pretty fun. Like using the fist weapon, there's a fist weapon sub-weapon in Harmony of Dissonance is pretty fun to use, has some cool spells associated with it. The axe can be pretty cool to use, but like the balance in terms of like having multiple roughly equivalent, equally efficient options that you can just pick on based off of personal taste, not really. There are kind of a couple of like best decisions you can make. And then the thing that cinches Harmony of Dissonance up into legendary tier and the kind of overrides the detriments that I've listed already is that it has the best alternate mode out of any Metroidvania in the entire, any Igavania in the entire series. In the alternate mode of Harmony of Dissonance, you play as Maxime, Juiced Belmont's friend, who moves even faster than Juiced. His movement is like even better, and it's even more fun to play as Maxime. And I could completely envision myself, if I ever just get bored one day, just booting up Harmony of Dissonance and just playing Maxime mode, like just for fun, just because I feel like doing it. Do you know what I mean? And like, and keep in mind that all of these games on this list are games that I played multiple times. So for me to go through one of these games over and over and over again, and then still at the end of it all, even after I like got all the footage I wanted, even after I like got everything I wanted from it in terms of like YouTube, to still want to go back and keep playing it, that to me is like a really special thing, and it's a testament to the game's enduring like fun factor. And there's only like a couple of games on this list that I could still like see myself going back and like picking up and playing kind of spontaneously in the future, just because I played all of them so much. So that's Harmony of Dissonance. Fucking love it. It's an incredibly good game. I had a ton of fun every time that I was playing it, pretty much. I guess to be fair, I guess I'll add one more criticism to Harmony of Dissonance, which is that the initial progression is kind of fucked, and it's kind of frustrating. Like, there's this one spot in particular towards the mid-game where, like, 4 different paths open up from this one spot in the castle, and if you take, and 3 of the paths just lead to, like, dead ends, which is pretty shitty. And like, Harmony of Dissonance kind of trolls you a couple times like that, where there'll be, like, spots where there's a passageway that looks like it's only being blocked off by one exploration tool, but you actually need, like, an exploration tool and then another one later on to actually get through the passageway. So it is a little bit fucked in terms of that. So I totally acknowledge that too. But once you learn the progression, that's the kind of thing that'll only trip you up once. Once you learn the progression, there are no like repeated playthrough annoyances really in Harmony of Dissonance, in my opinion. Maybe 1 or 2 frustrating bosses that could be balanced a little bit better, but those are all relatively very minor complaints, and at its core the game is just like rock solid, almost no problems. Okay, so rounding out the GBA trilogy, Aria of Sorrow. Guys, I hate to say it, I'm gonna put Aria of Sorrow down here. And this is not a decision that I'm happy about, particularly. But it is just sort of, I have to be honest about how I feel about the game and about what my tastes are, and like, if I'm not having fun, I can't trick myself into thinking that I'm having fun. So Aria of Sorrow is probably like the most, it's on par with Symphony of the Night for like the most beloved Castlevania game in the franchise. Like, for example, this tier list right here on Tiermaker, if you take the average of all tier lists that have been submitted by people just for data purposes relating to this list, like Aria of Sorrow and Symphony of the Night are the two games that are like at the very top. I think Aria of Sorrow has like the highest aggregate score out of all of them. So what is the difference between what those people are experiencing and what I'm experiencing? I would conjecture that at the core of it is the soul system. So the way the soul system works in Aria of Sorrow is that Soma Cruz, the protagonist character boy there, can kill enemies in the castle, and they will randomly drop souls that give you different abilities. Now, this might sound familiar based off of my complaints relating to Circle of the Moon. And the reason why... Well, first of all, okay. The reason why Aria of Sorrow is not like down here with Circle of the Moon is because Aria of Sorrow doesn't have any of Circle of the Moon's like other systemic problems. Like they both have the same fundamental problem, which is that I am not being treated like a person who makes choices and then succeeds or fails based off of those choices. I am being treated like a rat in a maze, where whatever just happens to drop in any given run is just what I take and what I run with. And you might say, Shovatar, you just need to get good. You just need to learn how to play the entirety of Aria of Sorrow with nothing but like the skeleton soul and the tiny devil soul, and you should never hope for anything more. Oh, and the Legion soul, I guess, because that's a guaranteed drop. And you should never hope for anything more. Again, the issue is not about what you can or can't do, or what like is or isn't possible. I'm sure it's possible to beat Aria of Sorrow with all kinds of fucked up restrictions, probably without using any souls at all. That's possible. Is that fun? Is it really fun to go through Aria of Sorrow and just get 0 good souls and have to wait until you get to fucking Legion to get anything that actually feels good to use? And you can sit there and say that, like, I don't know, that, like, Druaga and Needles are just as fun as Valkyrie and Lightning Doll to use, but you would only be fooling people who have never played the game. I remember going back and replaying Aria of Sorrow, not for the purposes of collecting any footage, but just for this video, to refresh my memory on it, because my initial reaction to the game was very, very, very positive, for reasons which I'll get into, because I do have some good things to say about the game, but I just want to explain why it's so relatively low, even though it is in like the positive hemisphere. And I would just like get out of the clock tower and just have nothing. Like no Valkyrie, no Lightning Doll. I'd get to the caverns and like Nightmare just like wouldn't drop. No Minotaur Soul, no Skeleton Knight Soul, no Devil or Chimera Soul, meaning that if I wanted to get Claim Solace, I'd have to go farm for them, and I'm gonna have to farm anyway for the Flame Demon and Succubus Souls if I want to get the real ending to the game, which you do, because that's like the real ending to the game. Those are 2 entire boss fights in an entire zone. The best boss fight in the game, actually, locked behind farming. So, like... And I would just get there, and I would just say to myself, I made a pact. I made a pact with myself after I finished Dawn of Sorrow, which I'll get to, that I am never farming another soul ever again as long as I live. And I abided by that. And after like 3 or 4 runs where I just got garbage in the mid-game, I was like, I'm just done. Like, there were literally like 3 or 4 times, like over a week, like a week and a half, there were like 3 or 4 times when I tried to sit down and play Aria of Sorrow, and I just got trash. And I was like, I don't care. I don't care. This isn't fun. Just give me the fucking Valkyrie soul. Like why? Why is this, like, cost being imposed on me of just arbitrary time wasting to just give me the fucking soul that I want? Like... And you might say, and like, again, you might just say get good. Well, guess what? I could get good, or I could get lucky. both of those approaches give you the same outcome in this context, in this paradigm that you're proposing, where either I get good at the game and I beat the game with trash, or I get lucky and I beat the game way more easily because of no different action that I took or no different decision that I made. And that just really annoys me. So with all that being said, with all that shit being talked, why isn't Aria of Sorrow like down in the dregs with like Simon's Quest? Well, it's because as much as I complain about the soul system, I think most of everything else about Aria of Sorrow is pretty good. I think the story is weird. The story is like just a lot of like not very interesting characters just talk at you, and they don't really have anything very interesting to say. Julius is pretty much the only exception there. Oh yeah, and the soundtrack is terrible. I don't really like the soundtrack for Aria of Sorrow at all. There's like a couple of good pieces here and there, but there's a lot of duds. I shouldn't say terrible. I should say underwhelming. Sorry, I'm trying to say about what I like about it. So what I like about it is the movement is great. The combat is pretty good. I do think that Soma is crying out for like the downward slash that Alucard had. But oh well. When you actually have good souls, the game is really fun. Like when you actually get fucking Valkyrie, or you get Lightning Doll, or you get Nightmare, when you're fucking supposed to, then the game becomes really fun because you have these really powerful tools that make you think about your magic meter in a certain way. But that's contingent on getting lucky or farming. But then the other thing about Aria of Sorrow that I really need to talk about, and that was a big factor in initially how highly I praised it, is that the Julius fight at the end of Aria of Sorrow, like close to the end of Aria of Sorrow, the fight with Julius Belmont towards the very end is arguably the pinnacle of the entire series in terms of like just that moment in isolation. Just that Julius Belmont fight with like one of the best pieces of music in the entire game, one of the coolest boss fights in the entire game. It's like, I honestly think that the game should have just ended after that fight, because the Chaos fight sucks. The Chaos fight is just a clusterfuck, and there's too much like random shit that can happen, and it's just like nonsense. Really, the game should have ended with the Julius fight, in my personal opinion. That's not how these games are. These games don't usually end with like doppelganger fights where you fight a guy who's like the same size as you. They usually end with giant monster Dracula fights. That's, you know, it would be a break with tradition, but like you're not gonna top that in terms of like just how fucking incredible that fight is, and how fun it is to learn properly, and how like great the music is. Everything about that fight is spectacular. So that Aria of Sorrow gets major points for, despite the fact that there's a lot of other things about it that I really don't like. And speaking of Julius, there's another alternate mode in Aria of Sorrow. There's Julius mode, where you play as, you'll never guess, it's Julius Belmont. And Julius mode is like better than Richter mode for me, just because I'm really bad at Richter mode, but it's nowhere near as good as Maxime mode. I don't know what it is exactly, but something about the way Julius controls in Julius mode just feels weird. The whip doesn't really feel very satisfying, and he swings it really fast, which means that it doesn't do like that much damage per swing, which is kind of like the opposite of what made the Belmont whip satisfying to use in previous games. Something I neglected to mention about like Dracula's Curse, for example, is that like in Dracula's Curse, like the fact that the whip has this big wind up to it and like this really strong impact sound makes it feel super powerful. So Julius is like missing that. But it is cool that it gives you like the full he has this full arsenal of sub weapons the whole time. You can swap between them. There's lots of like options and decisions to be made there, so that's good, but it's just like not it's not something that necessarily elevates the game very much. It's just sort of like, it's pretty cool, and it's more fun than the base game because you don't have to worry about like soul drops, but it's not making me like jump up and down in my chair and turn cartwheels. So unfortunately, Aria of Sorrow probably what some of you guys are going to consider to be a criminal underrating, but I just got to be honest about how I feel and about what I appreciate and what I don't appreciate. So there's Aria of Sorrow. And perhaps as punishment for ranking Aria of Sorrow so low, we have another jarring visual transition here, because my first attempt to record the last section of this tier list ranking failed because my microphone was malfunctioning, and I didn't know that it was malfunctioning until I finished recording everything. And you can't drag things off of the tier list in Tier Maker, so I had to just move everything that I had ranked already back down here so I could rank them again, which is why things look different now. Maybe this is better, because now I don't have to scroll down as much. Anyway, so the ranking for Aria of Sorrow is one that I don't feel great about it, but I also can't really justify putting it any higher based on my general feelings about the game. A ranking that I have absolutely no qualms about, however, is Dawn of Sorrow, going all the way down here at the very bottom of Problem tier, kind of barely bailing itself out of Unfortunate for reasons that I'll get into. So, centrally, my problem with Dawn of Sorrow is take everything that I said about Aria of Sorrow and all the complaints I had about the soul system and multiply that by 10, because in Dawn of Sorrow you have to get particular hearts not only to get access to particular like magic attacks, like sub-weapon attacks, but you also need to get particular souls to upgrade your weapons and get like weapons that are appropriate for the stage of the game that you go into. And this is another game, kind of like Circle of the Moon, where people like try to gaslight you, saying you don't need to farm and that like you're not supposed to farm. You're obviously supposed to farm. You're obviously supposed to get certain weapons to upgrade, certain souls to upgrade the weapons you want to get. And anybody out there who disagrees with me on that point, there's a very simple way to find out which one of us is right. Play Dawn of Sorrow, don't try to target or farm any souls, and see what kind of weapon you have when you get to Menace at the end of the game. Let's just see. Let's see what you end up with if you don't farm anything. That's my biggest problem with Dawn of Sorrow, is that it's just Castlevania Farming Simulator 2005. Completely baffling. I have some smaller complaints with the Dawn of Sorrow also, which is that the story is sillier, I think. Because Aria of Sorrow established basically this like new section of the Castlevania storyline. It takes place in like 2030 something rather than, the 1700s or the 1600s or the 1800s. And they introduced like all these new characters, this notion of like a global secret church organization that like monitors the world for like demon magic activity, which is fine. I don't really have a problem with that idea on its own, but the storyline of Dawn of Sorrow kind of made me realize something that I hadn't realized before, which is that there's just a lot of wasted potential in how that idea was executed. Because in Dawn of Sorrow, like, think about it, Dawn of Sorrow is the only game... I'll just talk about Dawn of Sorrow. I'll ignore Aria for now. Let's just say, like, Dawn of Sorrow is the game... one of the two games that takes place in, like, the modern day. What's now the modern day, what then was the future. But, like, it doesn't take advantage of that concept at all. The game actually goes out of its way, like, several contrivances to put Soma Cruz in an environment that looks identical to Dracula's castle, just like the previous games. What they could have done, what I would have liked to see from Dawn of Sorrow, if they're going to insist on setting the game in this like modern day time period, is why not take advantage of that setting? How about why not have Soma Cruz run around in like a city that's been fucked up by demon magic, like warped like apartment complexes or libraries or skyscrapers or something. Do you know what I mean? Like, actually have the fact that it takes place in the year 2030 matter somehow to how the game functions, because if the game didn't tell you that, then there would be basically no way to tell that's the case, barring like a couple of outfits and like the fact that there's a gun in the game. That's basically it. So I always thought it was so strange that they set the game in the 2030s, but then they didn't ever really have that impact anything within the game itself. So, but that's a very minor complaint, basically. all other complaints I have about Dawn of Sorrow are microscopic compared to my biggest issue, which is the soul system and the weapon synthesis system. So why is it in problem tier? Why is it not down in unfortunate tier, even though it's like all of the worst elements of Aria of Sorrow multiplied by 10 without the excellent Julius fight to counterbalance that? Well, for one thing, and this is true of all the DS trilogy games, the movement and the combat in Dawn of Sorrow is actually really good. Like, if you once you actually get a good weapon that does decent damage, like, the game feels really good to play. Like, the movement is fluid. There's lots of little tricks you can do. You can, like, backdash, cancel attacks to attack faster, things like that. Like, lots of little tricks. There's definitely a very high skill ceiling to it. That's one reason. The second reason is that Dawn of Sorrow has the Dawn of Sorrow alternate mode, which is Julius mode again, is really, really good. Except you don't just play as Julius, you play as Julius or Yoko or Alucard. You can, like, swap between them, like in Dracula's Curse, and that is really, really fun. Like, Julius mode in Aria of Sorrow, because it's like you are purely enjoying the movement and the combat and the pacing, and you don't have to fuck with any of the game's completely ridiculous, ill-advised systems. So Julius mode is like the real game, pretty much, and Dawn of Sorrow at base is just this horrible farming simulator you have to slog through once to unlock it. So if it was not for Julius mode, it would be all... If Julius mode didn't exist at all in Dawn of Sorrow, it would probably be all the way down here. Because, like, Circle of the Moon is only as high as it is because of Magician mode. If Magician mode didn't exist, then Circle of the Moon would also probably be, like, down here. But because I'm taking into account alternate modes, I'm ranking them based off of that. Like kind of balancing those two things out. If Dawn of Sorrow was only Julius mode, I might put it, like, all the way up into Great tier or something, maybe? Just because, like, there are a couple of annoyances that getting rid of the synthesis system doesn't quite fix. The soundtrack is a little bit, like, mediocre, and there's a couple of, like... Like, Julius mode is really good, but it doesn't, like, excite me very much, so, like, I would probably put it up in, like, the top of good tier, maybe the bottom of great tier, but balancing Julius mode with the main game, this is the ranking that it gets. So it's unfortunate that Julius mode is... like this really good game that's just trapped in this terrible game. That's basically how I feel about it. I think that's all I have to say about Dawn of Sorrow, so moving on to Portrait of Ruin, the second of the DS trilogy. Portrait of Ruin... fuck it. All the way up here. So, Portrait of Ruin is all the way up in excellent tier, and the main reason that I'm putting Portrait of Ruin up all the way up there, on par with, like, Symphony of the Night, is because it has the best combat in the entire series. And combat, just like movement, is something that's very, very important, and the two are interrelated, because it's what you're doing more often than anything else. It controls almost identically to Dawn of Sorrow, except you have, like, a whip-wielding protagonist now, which introduces more combat options. It also makes it easier to take advantage of, like, backdash canceling and other tricks like that. But it also doesn't have... get this. So you want to know how you get better weapons in Portrait of Ruin? You go to a part of the castle where the weapon is, and then you just get the weapon, and then you just have the weapon. And you don't have to waste a random arbitrary span of time killing the same enemy over and over again to just get the fucking weapon you want. Go figure. Go figure. The difficulty balance is also great in Portrait of Ruin, something that I kind of brushed over earlier. Well, I mentioned it a little bit with Symphony of the Night, but, like, the GBA trilogy had a hard time finding a good sweet spot for difficulty. Like, Circle of the Moon is people say Circle of the Moon is too hard. I agree, basically, because the difficulty is entirely contingent on which DSS cards randomly drop, so it basically doesn't have a consistent level of difficulty. It's just like you roll a fucking... you just roll the dice and just get what you get. And then Harmony of Dissonance at baseline is too easy. Aria is, like, better balanced, but then, like, in Portrait of Ruin, what they did to make the game feel like consistently difficult without like de-incentivizing exploration, which was the issue with high difficulty in these games, was on normal mode in Portrait of Ruin, enemies don't really do that much damage to you, but bosses do. Bosses will hit you really, really hard in Portrait of Ruin. They'll like four-shot you, maybe less depending on the boss, depending on where in the game you are. So, not only does the combat feel great because you've got access to this really good sub-weapon from the very beginning of the game called the Shuriken, which increases which amps the pacing up really high, and the difficulty balance is really high, so the combat encounters feel rewarding to learn and they feel challenging. You really have to take advantage of the things that the game gives you in order to overcome them. And also, the fact that you can swap back and forth between Jonathan and Charlotte means that you're never not going to have the tools you need to deal with a certain problem. And it opens up just a lot more possibilities, a lot more different choices you can make for how you tackle certain challenges. And relating this back to my channel, I basically played this game incorrectly when I was gathering footage for the channel, because I did a thing where I was like, I play as Jonathan, and like only play the game as Jonathan, and then like I played the game only as Charlotte, and in a way that was fun because it forced me to get creative and come up with like weird ways of tackling some of the game's challenges, but that's really not how the game is meant to be played. You're meant to swap back and forth between them, to utilize each of the characters to cover the other's weaknesses. Like that's how the game is really meant to be played. So it was kind of fun to go through the game like only playing as Charlotte, but ultimately that was not a good idea. Another thing about Portrait of Ruin that is really important and that needs to be stated is that I said that the bosses were good. I also think Portrait of Ruin has the best final boss fight in the entire series. The Dracula death fight at the very end of Portrait of Ruin is it's difficult, it's demanding, it's sort of like a test of everything that you've been tested on prior to that point, and it's also not random. It's a purely skill-based encounter where how Dracula and how Death behaves in Phase 1 is like entirely up to you, like when you bait him, and then in Phase 2, Dracula in Phase 2 can do kind of a stupid thing where he like backs you into a corner and then flies into you, but that's pretty rare. Mostly it's just about like giving him a ton of respect and just like reacting correctly. So I love the final boss of Portrait of Ruin. So with everything I just said, great boss fights, best combat in the series. It's pretty good soundtrack, better than Dawn of Sorrow. Definitely better than Aria. Why is it only at the bottom of excellent tier, like underneath C1? Why isn't it like up, above Symphony of the Night? Well, Portrait of Ruin has one really big problem, which is the quest system. So the DS trilogy, it's like Konami was put under some kind of gypsy curse with the DS trilogy, that every game had to have some weird, obnoxious, annoying system crowbarred into it. In Dawn of Sorrow, that was the weapon synthesis system, which was attached to your baseline power level as a player because it made the strength of your weapons contingent on farming. Or getting lucky, I guess. With Portrait of Ruin, what they did instead of the weapon synthesis... I hate saying weapon synthesis system, but that's what I have to say. What they did instead of weapon synthesis was there's an NPC who will send you out on quests, which are basically just like backtracking busy work. And the reward for those quests are a couple of sub-weapons, a couple of weapons, a couple of like spells for Charlotte, some items, like... So the rewards are impactful, but I also can tell you from personal experience that it's perfectly possible to beat Portrait of Ruin without doing a single quest. When I replayed Portrait of Ruin before making this video specifically with that objective in mind, and once I realized that was possible, and that the game was actually way more fun if you played it like that, then that was what bumped this game in my mind up from great to excellent. The fact that the quest system, in terms of just like enjoying the game, is optional. There is a very big asterisk that I have to put on the end of that, though, which is that there's a special challenge area called the Nest of Evil, which is only accessible via getting a quest and via doing a lot of map completion. which I also really don't like to do. So, in my opinion, Portrait of Ruin is the kind of game where, like, it's probably worth, like, doing the quests and unlocking the Nest of Evil once, like, the first time you play it. But if you ever just want to, like, sit down and play the game again and, like, not bother with that shit, you can do that, and that's still perfectly viable, and the game's still really fun. The game kind of saves itself by accident, by giving you the shuriken at the start of the game without, like, locking it behind any quests, because the shuriken plus, like, Charlotte's spells that she gets, like Spirit of Light especially in the mid-game, basically, like, means you're never gonna encounter a boss fight where you don't have access to, maybe if not, like, literally the best strategy, at least a very, very good strategy. Because all of Charlotte's spells, well, not all of them, but a lot of her useful spells can just be found out in the castle, or in the different portrait levels. So, and the Nest of Evil basically sucks. It's pretty cool at the start, and then about halfway through it just turns into shit. Not halfway through, like, once you get to the Double Frankenstein room, that room is a gigantic shit show. The last few bosses kind of suck. So it's like that's just in my opinion, it's really not worth the hassle in terms of balancing out, like, the fun of doing the Nest of Evil with the busy work annoyance of doing all those quests. So because the quest system is, like, semi-optional, I'm willing to put Portrait of Ruin up into excellent tier on the strength of its basic mechanics. And also because it almost made me feel an emotion with the storyline, which I wasn't expecting. As for the alternate modes in Portrait of Ruin, basically same thing. Like, Richter mode is really, really fun if you do the two things that I didn't do, which is take advantage of the character swapping mechanic as much as possible, and don't bother with the Nest of Evil. Again, I would probably recommend, like, if you want to do the Nest of Evil on Richter mode, like, I mean, give it a shot. It's a fun, like, one-time challenge to do and to overcome, but if you ever want to just, like, play the game again, the game is really fun to play if you just skip the Nest of Evil and you don't care about map completion. That's basically the conclusion that I eventually came to. I realized the game is not, like, technically literally forcing me to go do all this unfun shit to clear out the Nest of Evil, so I'm willing to, like, give it a pass on that score. There were a couple of other alternate modes in Portrait of Ruin that I never played, like Sisters mode and Axe Armor mode, so I can't really say anything to those. I guess one last criticism I would give of Portrait of Ruin, just to be completely fair, is that I think some of the level design is kind of lackluster. The what's it called? The City of Fools is pretty annoying, as is, of course, the Burnt Paradise, because it's the same, like, stage design. But if you're not, like, going for map completion, then you don't have to spend that much time in the levels individually, so there's not necessarily, like, you don't have a lot of time to get bored with them if you play it in that way. Which I think is the better way to play it. If you've played the game once already and, like, the novelty's starting to wear off, then just, like, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Just don't even bother with the Nest of Evil on repeat playthroughs. That's my advice anyway. So, okay, I think that's all I have to say about Portrait of Ruin, right? Going over it in my head. Yeah, I think that's it. Okay. Closing out the DS trilogy, Order of Ecclesia. Order of Ecclesia is going to go even higher up into Legendary tier. So, why is Order of Ecclesia that high up? For one thing, remember what I said before about the Gypsy Curse that Konami had, where they had to put, like, irrelevant, stupid systems in their games? Well, Order of Ecclesia has similar, like, quest systems to Portrait of Ruin, but you are less incentivized than ever before to actually engage with it. So it is not, like, semi-optional the way that, like, getting the access to the Nest of Evil is in Portrait of Ruin, where it's like, if you ignore the quest system, you don't get access to this one level of the game. In Order of Ecclesia, you do have to do a quest to open up the large cavern, which is Order of Ecclesia's, like, challenge room area. But the large cavern is basically a joke, and you only have to do, like, 2 quests in order to open it, which are not very hard to do at all. And I want to say you'd want to do one of those quests anyway, because it gives you movement speed increase boots? Anyway, I'm sorry, I'm getting very, very detailed right at the beginning. I'm just saying, like, right off the bat, Order of Ecclesia doesn't fall into the pitfalls that Dawn of Sorrow and Portrait of Ruin did, where by having annoying busy work systems, like, tied into some core component of the game. It's very, very peripheral. So the other reason why... So that's why it's not, like, low, but why is it high? It's high because it maintains the same combat, like the same excellent combat that Dawn of Sorrow and Portrait of Ruin had, but it's like a weapon magic system is much more interesting than the previous two games, where Shinoa can like use these different glyphs that give her like different weapons or different magical attacks, and you can like... There's magic, there's like a magic meter in Order of Ecclesia, the way that there is with Portrait of Ruin, but there's also hearts in Order of Ecclesia like there are in the classic Castlevania games. And so like you can spend hearts to execute stronger attacks, so now there's this like resource management element coming back into the series that had been gone basically since, I guess, like arguably Harmony of Dissonance, but really since like Dracula X, pretty much. That was the last game that I think I ended up having... That was the last game that I played prior to Order of Ecclesia where I really was like thinking about my heart count. So Order of Ecclesia makes you think more, the combat is great. It has the best soundtrack in the series, sort of on par with Rondo in that regard. And then the other thing that really kind of bumps it up into legendary tier for me is the fact that I said Portrait of Ruin almost made me feel an emotion. Order of Ecclesia actually made me feel an emotion, which is not what I was expecting from a Castlevania game, because Castlevania games are really more about the gameplay, and they have storylines, but the storylines are usually very simple. And the storyline in Order of Ecclesia is also very simple, but it manages to do something that I really, really like in narratives, where it kind of culminates at the end into one like image that perfectly encapsulates the entire story and emotional thrust of everything that comes before. And in Order of Ecclesia, that happens at the end, and it's really, really satisfying and just really well done. Even though the storyline is not... The storyline is like complicated by Castlevania standards, but it's not complicated at all by conventional standards. Also, I said best soundtrack, best single track in the entire franchise, which is Sorrow's Distortion. Played in the best boss fight in the entire franchise, which is the Albus fight, about halfway through, or like 2/3 of the way through in Order of Ecclesia. I could talk about the Albus fight for days. I don't want to get too like deep in the weeds here. It's basically like the best doppelganger fight in the game, even though it's only technically a doppelganger fight if you play Albus mode. I love the Albus fight. I love the boss fights in Order of Ecclesia in general. They're, I would say, maybe even better than the ones in Portrait of Ruin, although they're very close. There are a couple of dud boss fights in Order of Ecclesia that are like frustrating or annoying. So I guess I would say Portrait of Ruin's boss fights are probably better overall. But Order of Ecclesia's boss fights are still really, really good. They still hit that like sweet spot of difficulty where they're very scary, but they're also very fair and learnable. So why is it not above Harmony of Dissonance? Why is it not above Bloodlines if it has all these excellent things going in its favor? Well, there are some problems. The biggest problem with Order of Ecclesia is that the early game is very rough. You don't have any relevant magic abilities to kind of vary up your arsenal until the end of the Lighthouse, where you can get a light spell. And then prior to that, you're stuck with like this like short sword. And Order of Ecclesia wants you to lets you do this thing where you can dual wield like two weapons and then like hit the two different attack buttons back and forth to like rapid slash. The problem with that is that you're like locked to the ground while you're doing it, so it doesn't really flow well into a combat system that usually incentivizes you to like move as you're attacking or move very quickly after you start attacking. So it's just very unusual in Order of Ecclesia that you get to like stand still for long periods of time and just wail on enemies. So the dual wield mechanic is a little bit weird, and I always just kind of preferred canceling to attack really fast rather than rather than like the dual wield back and forth thing. So so that's a problem. Also, but to get back to what I was saying about the early game, there are some early levels that are really bad in Order of Ecclesia. There are some underwater levels, which are always a bad idea. The crab boss in the lighthouse is terrible. It takes way too long. It's just like a big spectacle that the game was a little bit too enamored with. Some of the early mountain levels are also pretty annoying, in my opinion. There's lots of just like obnoxious verticality. You do technically have the tools to deal with that, because you have access. You have like axes. You have classic Castlevania style like axe glyph you can use, but it's still kind of annoying to do some of those early levels. By the time you get to the end of the game, like once you get into Dracula's castle and everything in Dracula's castle, that's like that at the end game is like perfect. And then mid game, once you actually can build up like an arsenal of glyphs and you feel like you're making important choices, that's when it gets really good. But you have to go through this kind of annoying, boring early game to get to that, and that is a big problem. But I think the other things that it does correctly make up for that, and more than make up for that, and push it up into Legendary tier. Another thing that I want to close this out with is to say that Albus mode, which I briefly mentioned earlier, is the second best alternate mode in the whole game. Albus is a really powerful character who kind of perfectly embodies what an alternate mode of these games should be, which is a character who's very offensively powerful but defensively more vulnerable. And there's also... I felt myself getting better at Albus mode as I played it in a way that I don't think I really did with other... Or it didn't feel as intellectually challenging to play the other alternate modes. With Albus, he has a lot of different tools, and it's tricky to find out how to use them all optimally. So going through that process, learning how all his stuff works and mastering it, was a really, really rewarding process. So yes, the early game is pretty bad, but everything else that it does is so great that it kind of makes up for it all, and it catapults it up to that spot. And I think that's everything I have to say about Order of Ecclesia. So let's move on to Lament of Innocence, the first of the PS2 games. I think Lament of Innocence is going to go at the very top of problem tier, and I'm not 100% happy with that, but I'm just gonna let me just work through this as I explain it. So the reason why Lament of Innocence isn't going up into the top tiers is because at a very basic fundamental level, Lament of Innocence is kind of a boring game. You spend most of the game, so it's not like Castlevania 64. It's not like over the shoulder. It's not like third person, like conventional third person, run around, solve puzzles, platforming action game. It's more like DMC style. The camera's pulled back. You're fighting huge crowds of enemies all the time, or most of the time. And the thing about Castlevania's level design and combat design, and this is pretty much exclusively the case for classic Castlevania, but I'm just going to bring this up anyway, is that in a classic Castlevania stage, in a classic Castlevania room, every enemy matters. The placement of every single enemy in a stage is important and affects how you play that stage, how you approach the challenge. So individual enemies are really important. With Lament of Innocence, that paradigm is completely eliminated. And again, you could argue that paradigm was completely eliminated as far back as Symphony of the Night, but it's something that I really noticed in Castlevania, how enemies are just kind of this gray mass of tissue that you just beat up over and over again with your whip in these huge groups, and you basically spend most of the game plowing through the same enemies over and over again, just to like clear them out of the rooms and keep going. And that being said, there are things about Lament of Innocence that I think are really good. It looks great. I mean, the game is beautiful. The levels themselves look incredible. My problem, though, is that the levels themselves look incredible, but the levels themselves are also repetitive. Like, you're gonna walk through pretty much the same rooms, fighting the same enemies, over and over and over again in Lament of Innocence. And they're beautiful rooms. Like, they're really intricately detailed, like, lovingly designed rooms. The game looks great, but you're seeing them over and over and over again. And, like, with the enemies, it's the same way. The enemies look really cool in a lot of cases, but, like, I just kind of don't really feel that much like I'm playing a game. I feel like I'm basically not using my brain at all in terms of the actual, like, moment-to-moment gameplay of Lament of Innocence. What Lament of Innocence does do, let me pivot back to positivity here for a second, that I think is really cool and that actually does kind of engage your brain, is you can do the levels in Lament of Innocence in any order, which is really interesting because that opens up some different like routing possibilities, and you get to prioritize like what you want to get first, and then like which levels it makes sense to go and do after that to like minimize backtracking. I think that's really cool. It also has the same sub-weapon magic system that Harmony of Dissonance had, which means that every sub-weapon kind of has its own arsenal of magic that you unlock as you progress through the levels, which could also affect your routing, maybe. But in my opinion, I never really found a reason to use anything besides the axe. I used the axe, and then like it just did everything I could have ever wanted a sub-weapon to do, and I never really felt like I needed another sub-weapon for anything else. I use the holy water for like one boss, but then I'm like right back to the axe after that. So, cool idea in theory, but in practice, kind of like Harmony of Dissonance, honestly. Our own Harmony of Dissonance, like, it's very hard to find a reason not to use the Bible. In Lament of Innocence, I never really found a reason not to just use the axe for everything. Maybe there's something I'm missing. I'm sure, there's people who are way better at that game than I am. Maybe they know something I don't, but that was my experience. To maintain my positive angle here, I said that the enemies, the basic enemies that you fight are boring to fight, and I'm gonna stand by that, but the boss fights in Lament of Innocence are actually pretty cool. Some of the boss fights are very, very frustrating and very, very awful to play. The Undead Parasite springs to mind, the Succubus springs to mind, but some of them are great. The big standout there is the Forgotten One boss in Lament of Innocence, which is one of my favorite bosses in the entire franchise, because it's such a brutal and stringent test of everything that the game has been, all the skills that the game has been encouraging up to that point, kind of like how I think I described the Death Dracula fight in Portrait of Ruin exactly the same way. But the Forgotten One is also like just this cool boss down in this hidden area, who's also very consistently scary, and who makes you not just react correctly, but like think strategically about your positioning ahead of time in a way that a lot of other bosses in Lament of Innocence kind of don't. A lot of bosses in Lament of Innocence follow this like same pattern of like you dodge, like it's like turn-based combat almost, where it's like you dodge their attacks, then you hit them, then you wait, then you dodge their attacks, then you hit them, then you wait. The Forgotten One has elements of that, but there's also a lot more opportunities where being proactive, like clearing out maggots ahead of time, or like baiting his rocks to fall in a different place in Phase 3 can also be really rewarding. So I love the Forgotten One fight. And I like the bosses a lot better than I like the like non-boss combat, which is why I made it the point to do the game's boss rush so many times. I also think that the ending cutscenes are pretty neat. The last cutscene with Leon and Dracula, and like the music comes in, I think that's really good. But like, I can't really, and the alternate modes, of which there are two, I basically have no opinion on, because the basic combat is so repetitive and unengaging. Playing as a different character doesn't really feel that different most of the time, because most of the time you're clearing out the same cannon fodder enemies in the same identical rooms. So even though there are lots of things about Lament of Innocence that I think are really good and really cool, it has this like crack in its foundation that makes me feel like I can't really put it on par with like Aria of Sorrow or anything like that. And it's the kind of, and I would never play the game again, for all the reasons that I just listed. So it's unfortunate. This is probably the ranking that I feel the worst about, because there are lots of things about Lament of Innocence that I really like, as I just said, but I also can't really justify putting it higher than it is right now. So it's unfortunate, but that's just where it's going to have to be. Okay, going on to the second PS2 game, a ranking that I think I'm going to have fewer qualms about. Curse of Darkness is going to go all the way down at the bottom of unfortunate tier. So everything that I just said about Lament of Innocence and how its like basic combat is boring as fuck, imagine that, but imagine that the game is now 3 times longer. That's Curse of Darkness. You are also, it's the same thing as Lament of Innocence, where you're just walking through samey environments, tearing down the same repetitive enemies over and over again with like repetitive, boring combat. I don't get Curse of Darkness at all. I really don't. It's just 6 hours of boring, in my opinion. I don't think... I mean, I'll say this, and this is like kind of why Unfortunate Tier is called Unfortunate Tier. It's because Curse of Darkness does have a lot of ideas. It has ideas about a crafting system. It has ideas about an innocent... like a system, the Innocent Devil system, which I won't go into too much detail about. If you want to hear more about that, you can watch my Curse of Darkness video where I talk about it more in depth. But the Innocent Devil system is fundamentally unbalanced. A lot of Innocent Devils are completely useless and not worth your time to invest any effort into. There's one in particular that's comically overpowered and that kind of like crowds out everything else as viable options. The crafting system is just a lot of busy work and micromanagement for not much in the way of impactful choices, and just extra shit to like clutter up your experience. It's the same thing that I said before. Like, I don't understand what it was about the system of go to place, get weapon, have weapon, use weapon. I don't know why that process needed to be iterated upon. I don't get what the issue with that was. To be fair, Curse of Darkness tries to like integrate the different weapon types in a way that makes more sense than Dawn of Sorrow does, like actually giving you reasons to use different kinds of weapons, but ultimately, like, most of the weapons in the game are just beginner's traps, and they are way too slow and they suck. And there's very little reason to ever deviate from the basic, like, one-handed sword or one-handed axe weapons that you start off with, in my opinion. There are some things about Curse of Darkness that I like. I like the cutscenes. I actually look forward to the cutscenes in Curse of Darkness, because some of the characters are fun. Isaac in particular is completely hilarious. He is the zestiest character in the entire Castlevania franchise, and it's especially funny to me because he contrasts so sharply with like Hector, who's basically just normal protagonist man, and then Trevor, who's also just like a serious normal protagonist man, and then Isaac shows up and talks and acts like a complete and total goofball. So I really like the cutscenes, and any cutscene that Isaac is in is automatically great, but aside from that, like, I basically just said that my favorite part of the game are the parts where I'm not actually playing the game and I'm just watching the cutscenes, which is not really much in the way of praise. There is an alternate mode, but it doesn't do anything at all to address the central problem, which is that most of the game is just running through the same, like, boring environments, like, hitting the same... It's like fucking World of Warcraft. That's honestly kind of what it feels like sometimes. Like, when I was in, like when you're out in, like, the forest, and you're just, like, wailing on enemies over and over again, and there's, like, 6 of them, 9 of them, 12 of them in front of you. It's like... And I know you can skip a lot of combat encounters in Curse of Darkness, like, I get that, but then that begs the question of why they're even there. If the intention is for the player to skip them, then why even put the enemies in there in front of you? I don't know. So I think this ranking is fine, putting it below Simon's Quest, because Simon's Quest and Curse of Darkness are basically the same game, but Curse of Darkness is like 6 times as long, so I'm pretty much okay with this. Okay, closing out with a Castlevania Adventure Rebirth. I'm going to put Adventure Rebirth at the very top of good tier. Kind of almost going up into great tier, but not quite making it. Adventure Rebirth is kind of like... It's like the perfect, like, good tier game, where there's nothing about Adventure Rebirth that's really, like, that bad. It's a very impressive game in terms of its conception and its execution. The fact that they made like a classic arcade-style Castlevania game in 2010 and made it actually challenging, which is especially impressive. That's like really good. That's something that if I were a Castlevania fan, excuse me, at the time I would have found really, really exciting. But there's just something missing from Adventure Rebirth, and I don't know what it is exactly. It's kind of like Chronicles, where it reminds me of Chronicles a lot, actually, where it's like there's just some extra thing that's like missing. Like Dracula's Curse of the Companions, that's what like elevated Dracula's Curse. In Adventure Rebirth, the visuals are a little strange. The level design is okay. It's definitely very creative. It's definitely like trying to do a lot of classic Castlevania type stuff. Some of the boss fights are pretty cool, especially the mini bosses, the succubus fight, the Frankenstein fight, the death fight, the Dracula fight. They're all like really good. So there's nothing I could really point to in Adventure Rebirth specifically and say this is the thing about this game that's bad. I guess there's like 1 or 2 annoying spots. Like there's a part where you have to like do a pretty tight jump, but it's not as tight as the jump in Chronicles, and it's not like at the very end of the game like it is in Chronicles. So it's really not even close to as big of a deal. So there's nothing about it that's really bad, but there's also nothing about it that's like really, really good, in my opinion. So it's I kind of feel bad for having it down here when it doesn't really do anything wrong exactly, but it also doesn't like do anything to elevate itself. I don't know. It's a very weird game. It's a very, very weird game. But it's ultimately, I think pretty good, and it's the kind of thing where, like, if you enjoyed other classic Castlevania games, especially, like, it feels a lot like Castlevania 1, kind of. It feels a little bit like Dracula's Curse. There's, like, bits of Bloodlines in there. There's a lot of things going into Adventure Rebirth, but it is pretty good, and I think that's pretty much all I can say about it. That's the last ranking I'm gonna do. I guess what I'll do now is I'll just give, like, recommendations blanketly, because I actually have recommendations that would not necessarily be reflected on this chart. If you're interested in the Castlevania franchise and you want to get into it, my recommendations would be that you play the games in release order, because you'll appreciate the innovations more that way. And also, that if a game isn't clicking for you, if you like can't stand the stiff movement and jumping and like C1 or C3, or you know, something about one of the games just rubs you the wrong way, don't sweat it. Don't sweat it. Don't force yourself to play the game if you don't want to. But if I was recommending games, I would say Castlevania 1, Castlevania 3, either version, really doesn't matter. Probably go with the JP version just because it'll probably feel easier. Super Castlevania 4, I actually would recommend that, because I personally don't like it, but I am vastly outnumbered by people who disagree with me, and there are some people who say that that game is like the best game of the series, or some people that just clicks. So I would recommend Super Castlevania 4, definitely Rondo of Blood, definitely Bloodlines, then I'd recommend Symphony of the Night, Harmony of Dissonance, Portrait of Ruin, and Order of Ecclesia. So how many games have I listed there? 9? Yeah, I guess I think those are like the games that I would rank as like absolute must plays. I'd maybe cut Portrait out of that list. because Portrait is kind of annoying on a first playthrough. So I guess I'll go down to those 8. C1, C3, Super Castlevania IV, Rondo, Bloodlines, Symphony of the Night, Harmony of Dissonance, Order of Ecclesia. Those are the ones that I would like recommend strongly. Then like maybe Portrait of Ruin and like maybe Aria of Sorrow, because Aria of Sorrow is similar to Super Castlevania IV, where I don't like it, but a lot of other people seem to. So maybe also give that a shot if you don't mind, like, if you don't mind having absolutely no control over what abilities are available to you, which I think some people really like these days. And then if you enjoy like the classic, if you enjoyed like Castlevania 1 and Castlevania 3, then try out Chronicles, try out Dracula X, try out Belmont's Revenge. If you really enjoyed like Symphony of the Night, then definitely try Aria of Sorrow, and Portrait of Ruin. And if you are really morbidly curious, feel free to check out Circle of the Moon, but I would really not recommend that game. So I think that's just about going to do it. This is not going to be my last Castlevania video. I actually have a whole other last series of videos that I'm going to show you guys coming up soon after this. I'm really excited for you guys all to see them. And that should be coming out pretty soon, actually. So keep your eyes peeled for that. And hey, if you have any, I'm sure people disagree with me about these tier lists, these rankings, please leave a comment. You know, I have every right to express my opinion, you have every right to express your opinion, you know what I mean? So, so please don't be afraid to say what you think about all this, when you take a look at it. And so, with that, I will now sign off by also encouraging you to not only leave a comment, if you have an opinion, but also to keep on Earth rocking. And I'll see you guys soon, again.